Hey guys, I'm Urizi. This story is all about what if Naruto was assigned to Asuma and Team 10. Mizuki never got to shoot his mouth off at Naruto the night he took the Scroll of Seals. Other than skipping a half-manic monologue from him, what exactly did this change for everyone's favorite blonde ninja? Who knows? Before we proceed with the story, please like and subscribe to this channel if you liked the video, and don't forget to check the description for the other works of the author if you liked the story. Let's start. Chapter 26, Lying in the Gutter, Gazing at the Stars. With only a few minutes before Team 10's scheduled clash with Team Guy, the younger team of Genin met each other in a preemptive powwow of sorts to hash out a makeshift game plan. Now that they had seen all of Team Guy in action, Naruto had previously fought Tenten even though she hadn't been seen in the tournament, so he got them up to speed. The anchor point of the brain trust was Shikamaru, and he had only come to one definite conclusion on their chances next round. "We're screwed," Shikamaru said calmly and completely serious, nodding as he was certain of his statement. "We're completely, totally screwed." Ino's jaw dropped at Shikamaru's blunt dismissal of their chances at victory. "What the hell do you mean we're screwed? We can't be screwed. Goldie couldn't tell him we're not screwed right now, dammit," she said, almost desperate to hear a contradiction to Shikamaru. Naruto could only give her a helpless shrug in response. "Why are we screwed? One reason and one reason only." Shikamaru began to logically explain. "It's not Tenten. It's not really Neji, even though he's definitely a big problem, because Naruto can beat Neji, and I might be able to as well. It's all Lee." Ino tilted her head cutely to the side in confusion. "Lee?" Naruto nodded, understanding Shikamaru's point. "Yep. Rock Lee." "Why Lee?" Ino asked, honestly wanting to know exactly why he was the one they couldn't plan for. Naruto and Shikamaru both looked at each other before nodding simultaneously. Right before Naruto began desperately speaking, his blue eyes quivering, "Lee is so fast. He's faster than me. Way faster than me. He can outrun Shikamaru's shadow all day long, and you can't hit a moving target like Lee with your Senbon or your clan jutsu, Ino-chan. None of us know any genjutsu." Picking up where Naruto left off, Shikamaru argued his own point. "If it comes to a team battle, then they've got it covered from each side. They know how their team works for them, and they can cover Lee to come in close and pick me and Ino off. If it comes down to one-on-one matches, then which one of us is going to fight Lee? He'll outwork me and muscle through my plans, and a dogfight with Naruto still has a good chance of him losing. Basically, whoever fights Lee is going to get the crap kicked out of them, win or lose." "Okay," Naruto said, trying to get a handle on the situation. "I'll fight first no matter what, and I'll stay in until Lee shows up. I'll either beat him or I'll lose, but I know I can wear him down enough for the next one of you to win after me." Ino gave Naruto a deadpan look before adding her own opinion. "Seeing as how they left her out of the one-on-one deliberations, oh Goldie-kun, that's so noble, but it's the stupidest idea I've ever heard in my entire life. We're picking one-on-one fights and I'll fight first. I know how to do this. You guys are looking at this the wrong way. It needs a woman's touch," she replied confidently. This confidence only got looks of skepticism from her two male teammates that got Ino to give them deadly serious glares. "I'm fighting first. If you stop me, I'm going to poison your food with something humiliating the first chance I get. You know I can." A squinted-eyed look came over Naruto's face. Ino-chan? I don't think I fight first," Ino said with emphasis in her voice and a deceptively sweet tone to go with her smile. "Okay." For some reason a shiver went down the spines of both Shikamaru and Naruto. There wasn't really any more time to deliberate, as intermission was just about over and it was showtime once again. On the field. During the coin toss, Neji just kept staring at Naruto with a smirk while Naruto tried to glare him down. He just wanted to beat that smug look right off of his stupid little riotous, high and mighty son of a dash. "Heads," Jay said, stopping Naruto's train of thought on mushing Neji's face into the sand in the Zen garden, sand that probably had the remains of 4 people scattered in there somewhere. That would show him. The older Konoha team gets to pick the conditions for the round. One-on-one. Neji said, sounding as if victory were assured by breaking up what had seemed to be a well-oiled machine of teamwork. A nod came from Jay. "All right, go pick your reps for the first fight." he instructed before both teams stepped away from each other. Team 10 took this moment to address Ino fighting first one last time. Ino-chan. Naruto said, stopping her and putting his hands on her shoulders, are you sure you want to go first? Instead of instantly answering, Ino frowned at Naruto and looked between him and Shikamaru before answering, do you really believe in me that little? She asked, getting both of their eyes to widen, I've been training hard to get better too, just like you have for situations like this. She said, gesturing back towards Team Guy, what's the point of letting you get all beaten up for no reason while I just sit off to the side? I've done enough of that, thank you. This will be fine. I know what I'm doing. With that, she got herself out of Naruto's very loose grip and walked towards Jay, leaving Naruto and Shikamaru to walk back to the viewing area by themselves. Man, I suck. Naruto said to himself, for so long I've been thinking about how to get stronger to protect you guys and help you out because I thought that was what I was supposed to be on the team for. I didn't stop to actually think about how either of you felt about it. Neither of us ever particularly liked the idea of letting you do the lion's share of the fighting, Naruto. Remember the mission to back up Team 7 in Nami no Kuni. Shikamaru said, falling in step with his teammate, you may have thought we died for a bit, but before that we had to watch you get torn apart by Haku in that dome of mirrors without having a way to reach you. That really stuck with us, especially Ino. This plan of hers is something she thinks she needs. Ino's eyes twinkled in triumph when she arrived back over to Jay to find Lee already waiting there. Once he saw her he frowned heavily, I was hoping to face Naruto-kun first. Lee said in a disappointed sounding tone of voice, he seems to have gotten stronger than when we first met. Oh, Goldie-kun is way stronger now than he was when he probably met you. Ino replied nonchalantly, but sorry to say, you've got to fight me first if you want to get to him. I don't plan on making it that easy for you either. Even if he wasn't fighting the person on this team that he was the most excited to face, a fight was still a fight, and Ino seemed to not be willing to hand him his victory on a silver platter. Very well then, Yamanaka-san. If you are to be my opponent, then I will fight you with all of my strength. I'd honestly rather you didn't. Ino thought to herself as she set herself into a special-looking fighting stance. It was basically her regular stance that she used before, the academy style that allowed her hands to be free for hand seals, but this variation had her hands set in a way that slightly crossed them in front of her body, almost as if she was preparing for a preemptive block. It didn't seem like she was ready to trade strikes with anyone, and it didn't look as if she was going to focus on her ninjutsu either. Quarter-final round matchup, Fight 1, Rock Lee of Konoha vs. Yamanaka Ino of Konoha. Begin. Lee set himself in his stance, coiled and ready for whatever Ino's first move would be, as he was prepared to fight a reactionary battle due to not knowing much about her fighting style. He was most certainly not prepared for Ino's hands to fly up to the back of her head in order to undo her ponytail and shift her posture into that of a pin-up pose, complete with a cute and seductive wink at Lee. You don't really want to hurt me, do you, Lee? Ino asked in her sweetest voice while keeping her pose. I'd really rather we just put all of this silly fighting behind us, so how about it? If you quit, I'll quit. That's fair, right? I'd be in your debt. Lee didn't seem like the kind of guy that spent much time around girls other than his teammate, and she certainly didn't seem like Tenten would ever use this tactic. It was just unfair, because even with Naruto's 6 months of building up a tolerance to Ino's charms, this strategy always got him in the end without so much as a fight. There was no way Lee could resist it if Naruto couldn't. It was the closest thing that Ino would allow on that team to Naruto's Warak no Jutsu. But for everything there was always an anomaly of some sort, and Lee seemed more confused than dumbstruck. I do not understand, Yamanaka-san, why would I concede to a draw when the battle has not even begun yet? And are you stretching after the fight has begun? Lee shook his head and let out a chiding laugh. Bad form. Very bad form. Ino was surprised enough to drop her jaw at the lack of appropriate response. You're supposed to fall to your knees at my charm. She yelled at him in return. Damn it, if Goldie-kun had enough skill to make a subtle breeze with his wind chakra to blow my hair around, you'd be putty right now. Don't blame me for that crappy idea, Ino Buta-chan. A growl came from Ino. That's it, fuck it, I'm pissed, let's fight. And in one motion from the place of her hands behind her head, she drew a senbon from a wristband that she hid underneath her left arm warmer and launched it directly at Lee with her right hand. That was the go-ahead for Lee to begin moving, and he did so with gusto, trying to take advantage of Ino's wasted throwing motion once he avoided the small needle. But there was no wasted motion in Ino's throw, and she was able to get her hands back into her ready position just as he was upon her. Ino shot a leg out to catch Lee in the stomach, but he was too experienced at taijutsu to hit so easily, as he simply moved out of the way of her straight kick and swept her standing leg out from under her, knocking her to the ground. The moment she hit the ground, Ino had already reached back underneath her arm warmer to let loose another senbon, and her attempt to throw it forced Lee to pause in his attempt at an overhead axe kick that would have been directed at her. With the opening from Lee's hesitation, Ino rolled backwards to get back up before he launched another attack and jumped away from him. "You cannot get away that easily," Lee said as he rushed forward towards her again. He didn't get close enough to attack her again, however, as Ino grabbed a small smoke bomb from her supply pouch and threw it at the ground directly underneath herself. It exploded in a cloud of blue gas and forced Lee to immediately stop his advance once Tenten yelled out to him. "That's not smoke, Lee, that's some kind of poison. Stay away from it." Lee immediately jumped back while holding his breath to keep from inhaling any of the gas at all, but was forced to dodge 3 more senbon flying at him from the cloud. He honed in on an Ino running away from him out of the cloud to get more distance, and he took the long way around to cut her off and avoid the poison cloud. The moment he really got past the cloud, however, Ino jumped out past him perpendicular to his movement with an obviously poisoned senbon in her hand, ready to give him some amateur acupuncture, showing that the Ino he had originally intended to pursue was merely a bunshin. Unfortunately, Ino's movements weren't fast enough to catch Lee off guard, even though he only saw her coming from his peripheral vision. Lee used his hand to block Ino's senbon hand downward, throwing her stumbling past him off balance. He followed up by attacking with a counter-spinning back sweep that knocked Ino off her feet and sent her spinning off into a corner pillar of the stone bridge set at the stream, Konoha Reppu, Leaf Gale. Ino hit the pillar with her body, racking her body with pain, as even from an attack such as that, just a leg sweep, there was incredible technique and momentum behind it. Ugh. She sat up against the pillar with a wince as Lee came back in to attack her. His first punch missed and smacked off of the pillar, and Ino's retaliatory strike was blocked and returned with an elbow to the side that sent Ino stumbling in that direction. His style is way cleaner than Naruto's. "When I miss, I pay for it right then and there. If you made a mistake when fighting Naruto, his main objective would be to first try to grab you somehow, and if you knew how to defend yourself, you still had a chance to avoid damage. One more mistake though and you'd wind up in quite a bit of physical agony if he managed to get a hold of you." On the other hand, Lee would hit her the exact moment she screwed up, and unlike the spars with Naruto, his punches were intended to break her. "I've got to get away," Ino thought to herself, barely able to defend against Lee as he battered her even through her attempts to block him. As she was being pummeled even around her tries to prevent such with her arms, Ino kept taking steps back. This eventually led to Ino stepping off of the edge of the flat ground and falling into the stream trench. "Damn it!" she yelled as she shakily landed on the surface of the water. "You cannot run now," Lee said as he jumped down into the trench as well and faced off with Ino as they both stood on the surface of the water. While Lee seemed fresh and in his taijutsu stance ready for more combat, Ino was bruised and rather thoroughly beaten as well as breathing heavily. Okay, maybe this wasn't such a good idea after all. She planned on getting herself out of that demote the moment she could, until she really got a good look around and a light clicked on in her head. Running away was never going to work, despite the fact that in Shikamaru's own quoted opinion Team 10 specialized in it, or more specifically, hiding and running away. The further she ran, Lee would always catch up to her, so her best chance was to pigeonhole him so that lateral movement wasn't as much of an issue. If she could do that, then she could find a way to poison him, she just knew it. And this was the best place for it and the only real opportunity she would have. Ino moved to the right, but Lee jumped in front of the direction she would have wound up taking, cutting off what he had thought would be an attempt by her to run away down the length of the stream. This was what Ino wanted though, as it made it so that if Lee tried to dodge to the sides, there was only so far out of the way he could move without hitting the moat walls. Once she saw Lee take the bait, Ino formed the ram seal to build up her chakra as she took a deep breath to focus it in the back of her throat. "Let's see you punch your way out of this." Dakujiri, poison mist. Ino opened her mouth and spewed out a yellow poisonous fog directly at Lee, wide enough that he wouldn't be able to dodge it, and it expanded upwards so that he would not be able to jump over it. Both Naruto and Shikamaru were watching Ino with rather proud looks on their faces. Ino's training for that jutsu partly consisted of building up a powerful natural immunity to the poison that she exhaled. Even after learning the process to execute the jutsu at the start of the month, she had to adjust her body to handle storing the poison, something that was very hard on her for weeks at a time as she had to directly ingest the ingredients for her own poisons. This was all done to make her little area of focus just a bit more practical for use in battle. She had done it for them. Lee. Tenten yelled in alarm once she saw Ino fire her poison mist from her mouth. He can't dodge that. He'll die. Neji didn't respond, he simply stared at the unfolding battle in front of him impassively, though one could see the subtle tightening of his muscles showing his focus on the outcome. Back on the battlefield, Ino's poison cloud settled over Lee's body and Ino stood staring and waiting for it to disperse so that she could see if she had won or not. She was ready to apply her antidote if the need arose immediately after she was called the winner of the match. I knew I could do it somehow. She thought to herself as the air in the moat cleared out, and Ino almost lost her concentration on water walking once she saw what awaited her. You've got to be kidding me. She yelled. Why did she yell? Because Lee had gotten down on his hands and knees and had dunked his head underneath the water to avoid the poison. He suddenly pulled his head out of the water and stood up while taking a deep breath. Ah, that was a close call. You are very skilled, Yamanaka-san. I was right not to underestimate you. There was no way Ino was going to let herself lose after everything that it took to get him down in the moat in the first place, and she'd be damned if she was going to let her prey escape. He had to get close to defeat her, thus he had to be the one to stay close. She was the one dictating the field of the battle, and she was keeping it down there where she had a chance at hitting him with something. It's not over yet. Ino said as she made a small chain of hand seals and inhaled deeply again. Takasei Tankisha, Toxic Spitfire. Ino fired a barrage of several blue poisonous projectiles from her mouth at Lee, forcing him to back off and run away to avoid getting hit with one. Ino wasn't done as she remade the seals and fired another set, keeping Lee in a constant state of retreat. Lee dodged Ino's poison shots deftly as he kept moving further out of her range of fire, far enough for her to stop shooting. Once again I have to curse my lack of ninjutsu, Gai-sensei. Lee said to himself lowly. He was worked in a funnel. The closer he would get to Ino, the easier it would be for her to hit him with one of her poison ninjutsu. And here he thought all Yamanaka ninja used their mind techniques to win. Lee. At that moment the booming voice from the crowd sounded out over everything else once more, and Lee obviously knew who it was after spending well over a year and a half training directly under him. Gai-sensei. Take him off. Gai shouted confidently, I'll allow it so that you can continue showing everyone just what you're made of. Hearing that he was allowed to take him off put a huge smile on his face, and he immediately bent down to do just that. Ino figured that they were talking about something else entirely. You. No, you do not take him off. You leave him on. I don't want to see you go commando in that jumpsuit. When Lee stood straight back up holding a pair of ankle weights, Ino blinked in surprise. Oh. Never mind, but what are a few pounds of weight going to do? That is much better. Lee said to himself happily before throwing the weights out to the sides. Once they hit the walls of the moat they smashed holes into them, showing just how heavy the weights were. Now let us finish this, Yamanaka-san. Lee said as he began to unwrap the bandages from around his hands. Ino was now on the defensive more than ever. You should have thrown those at me if you wanted a decent attack. Ino shouted, you aren't going to even get close to me again as long as we're stuck in dash. Before she could even finish, Lee ran at her faster than he ever did before. He gets faster. Not giving up, Ino went back to the well so to speak and fired her poison rounds from her mouth, but Lee dodged them as if they were nothing. Getting desperate to stop him, Ino grabbed at the arm warmer on her right arm and pulled it back to reveal 5 wrist and forearm mounted devices, small barrels mounted on leather straps with strings at the back for Ino to pull to force them to fire. And fire Ino did, shooting 5 senbon simultaneously down the moat of a stream at Lee in a manner that one would find it horrifyingly difficult to dodge. But Lee did dodge, and dodge did he ever. Because the next thing Ino knew, just as she had started building up the chakra for her poison gas attack to keep him from getting closer to her, he blurred right out of her sight and was right in front of her. Before she could even gasp in shock, he had kicked her just as hard as she figured a mule would find a way to, possibly harder because she was flying through the air. No, it's not over yet, It can't be. Ino made a move to try and turn herself around in midair to land better, but Lee was flying through the air with the same trajectory as her, following closely directly underneath. Kagebayu, shadow of the dancing leaf. Bandages began to wrap around Ino's body and constricting her from moving or trying to escape. You are a very talented Kunoichi Yamanaka-san, but our battle is over. Lee then caused them to tilt directly upside down as he grabbed a tight hold of her and began rotating them. In the stands, Asuma jumped up from his seat the moment he saw Lee hovering underneath Ino. Guy, did you teach him how to open the gates and then tell him it was alright to use it on my genin? He asked tensely. He could kill her with that. I know, Asuma. Guy said seriously, but he wouldn't have gotten close to her any other way as long as they were down there. She's smart enough to keep him back until she found a way to defeat him. It was necessary. That didn't explain anything, nor was it what Asuma wanted to hear at all. But starting a fight in the crowd with his comrade wouldn't solve a thing, and besides, Ino was a ninja. She was prepared for something like this to happen. The moment Lee started hovering beneath Ino, it was quite clear that there was only one attack that would be worst-case scenario for her in that kind of position, and they could see it in slow motion as if even they had Sharingan. She can't break that. Shikamaru muttered to himself, and like a shot both he and Naruto were off running out of the room and down the stairs to get out to the field as fast as they could. I can't break free. I can't even move. There isn't any space for me to work the seals for a kawarimi. Ino thought to herself as she took a deep breath and braced herself for impact. Damn it. I'm sorry to use one of the 8 gates on you, but... Omote range, front lotus. Lee slammed Ino and himself top first into the surface of the water, submerging them both in the water with a crash that sent water flying high into the air from the force generated by Lee's attack. The crowd let out a respective groan due to the rather brutal-looking maneuver and seemed to be waiting on their hands for the combatants to surface. After a few seconds, Lee emerged from the water to stand back on the surface and dragged Ino out as well before placing her over his back and getting both of them out of the moat and back onto land. Taking a few steps, he set a motionless Ino down and walked away from her before heaving a sigh. Yamanaka Ino is unable to continue. The winner of match 1 is Rock Lee of Konoha. Lee gave a thumbs up and a bright smile before Naruto and Shikamaru ran over, beating the medics to Ino. Ino/Ino-chan. Her eyes shot open as Shikamaru helped her sit up so that she could spit out the water in her lungs from being stuck underwater and cough. Shikamaru pat her on the back to help her cough the water out. Take it easy, alright? He said once her coughing started to die down. It's over. Ino's loosened and thoroughly soaked hair obscured most of her face from view, though her voice was weak when she tried to speak. That really hurt. Cough, so bad. A weak smile pasted itself across her face. Luckily my neck broke my fall. If it was on the ground instead of in the stream, that would have killed her. Naruto thought to himself. Ino wasn't going to be walking herself back up to the viewing box, that was for certain. Naruto looked up from Ino, who was being looked over by the medics, to Lee, who was standing a ways away getting his second wind. It didn't look like he was going to switch out at all. Lee's really dangerous. I'm dash. You're going to take Ino to the medic bay. Shikamaru said, cutting Naruto off and getting him to turn towards him suddenly. I'm fighting next. He threw one of Ino's arms over his neck and helped her stand up so that he could walk her over to Naruto. What? Naruto stuttered out as Ino was more or less dumped on him so that he was forced to keep her upright. He shifted her about so that he could hold on to her the same way Shikamaru had been. Shikamaru, are you serious? You're going to fight him? Yeah, and you're taking Ino to the back because she doesn't really trust anyone to watch her vulnerable body except you. Shikamaru said as he shooed Naruto away. Now get off the field. 2 minutes are almost up. Apparently the medics doubled as field security because they then began escorting Naruto off of the field. Without much of a choice left in the matter, Naruto moved Ino so that he could carry her piggyback style to keep her from having to try to help him move her. A frown was evident on his face as he left the field, leaving Shikamaru out there with Lee. I'm. Naruto heard Ino speak too softly for him to make out what she had said. What was that, Ino-chan? I didn't hear it. He asked, turning his head back to get a better view of the girl he was carrying. Ino just weakly shook her head, not particularly up to talking anymore. It didn't matter anyway, Not to anyone other than her at least, I got him. She thought to herself as she set her head on Naruto's shoulder and decided to get some rest and heal now that she was eliminated. At least I got him. Genma was the next up to referee the upcoming fight and gave a mental time check before looking over at Shikamaru. Are you going to get over here anytime soon, kid? It's time to start. A dry yet irritated look came over Shikamaru's face at Genma's question. After what I've seen since round 1 from both him and every other fight start in this tournament ever, I don't have to be anywhere near him to start, and if you think I'm going to walk over there and stand right in front of that guy to start this fight, then you must be as dumb as I look. A twitching eye from Genma was his response at first. Finally one of these kids picked up on it. The whole field is the starting point. He didn't have to be such a brat about it though. Genma then began the fight announcement. Match 2, Rock Lee of Konoha vs. Nara Shikamaru of Konoha. Begin. If he wasn't already far enough away, Shikamaru turned tail and immediately began running away from Lee without even bothering to try and attack him directly. Caught off guard, Lee took a second before taking off in pursuit of Shikamaru. If he could outpace Ino, then he could do the same to Shikamaru far more easily, even as exhausted as he was from using the Omote range. He felt slower than he should have felt without his weights, but as far as Lee was concerned he had just burned out his muscles beforehand with the use of the gates. He was merely tired. Eventually he caught up to Shikamaru just outside of the forest area and cut him off by stopping directly in front of him. His back turned to Shikamaru. You will not be going any further, Lee said, turning around and standing in his taijutsu stance before he looked down and realized something. And neither will I. I am aware of your shadow ninjutsu, Nara-san. If I get close enough to try and hit you, I will be well within the range of your shadow. So the best way to ensure my own victory is to stay away and keep my own distance. Shikamaru had a bored expression on his face and his hands in his pockets. Sure. Whatever you want to think, Chief. But, Lee said, immediately afterwards, if I cannot attack you, I cannot defeat you. So I must engage you in order to win this fight. So prepare yourself. Shikamaru just shrugged in response. All right. We can do that too. He took his hands out of his pockets and prepared himself for action. But, Lee continued, once again about to contradict his previous statement, I still have to think of a way to get close without getting caught in your shadow. He then looked around at the trees and the foliage around them, more specifically behind him. Haha. Lee exclaimed victoriously, I have the advantage. You have nowhere to hide your shadow in an effort to ambush me. Therefore all I have to do is keep an eye on the shadow at your feet. Shikamaru nodded as if Lee's plan made sense before he spoke again. How long has this been going on? I sort of lost count. Hey, Proctor guy, how long has it been since the fight started? Genma shifted his senbon around in his mouth impatiently. This fight, if that's what you want to call it, has been going on for over 3 Kami-forsaken minutes. He could appreciate a chess match of an encounter, but this was far from that. It was like both sides were stalling, or Shikamaru was stalling. Lee was just being weird. Why does it matter? No answer was given by Shikamaru, who just rubbed the back of his head and spoke to himself. Really? Well, I guess this thing's been dragging out for long enough. He ignored the crowd's jeering of we agree and he suddenly formed the rat seal to force his shadow to stir. Kagemon no Jutsu, Shadow Possession Jutsu. I appreciate your straightforward approach, Nara-san, but dash. Lee tried to begin moving to avoid Shikamaru's shadow, but his body parts felt like lead. What? Am I already captured? Nope. Shikamaru said, Ino just managed to get you with one of her senbon before last round ended. But it wasn't anywhere vital, so it took a while to begin taking effect. There wasn't any reason to try to make you fight if you weren't going to attack me, so I just waited it out. He said as his shadow shot out towards Lee with intent to capture. Naruto looked over at Ino, who was sitting on a nearby bench getting rest, and took note of the serene smile on her face. You got Lee, Ino-chan? When? You didn't hit him when you were attacking him. I didn't. She admitted, but he dragged me out of the water after he pile drove me into the stream, didn't he? And they didn't call the fight yet, so it wasn't really cheating. Tenten looked at Ino in surprise. You actually poisoned him. Give me the antidote. Her teammate was down there with a toxic substance running through his system. Ino shook her head. There is no antidote, It was just a paralysis serum that wears off in a few hours. It makes your body feel like you're playing tug of war with an ox just when you try to move an arm or leg, and I stabbed him with 2 of them. He can't outrun Shikamaru's shadow like that. Gotcha. Shikamaru said once his shadow got a firm hold of Lee's, and that's checkmate. Give up or I'll make things get way worse for you. If you couldn't move before, there's no way you can possibly move now. I have come all this way. I cannot just surrender like this. Lee thought as he began to focus his chakra inside of his body. I refuse to lose. Shikamaru was unaware of the buildup of power beginning inside of Lee and tried to reason with him. You fought hard and you beat Ino, that's something you can go out on, leave the rest to your teammates. I'm not sure I can hold back on my next move without killing you. I will not lose. Lee shouted at the top of his lungs, surprising everyone in the arena that thought it was Shikamaru's victory for sure. Human, Gate of Healing, open. Lee's body underwent a vast increase of stamina that seemed to thoroughly revitalize his body and forced his muscles to improve back to the way they were when he defeated Ino. This allowed him to get the feeling in his body back, but it wasn't enough, it just meant that he was back to normal. Seaman, Gate of Life, open. Shikamaru immediately went on alarm after hearing Lee shout. Once he opened the next gate, he could immediately begin feeling the strain on his person to keep control over Lee. Luckily he had been training to keep a hold on stronger opponents like Naruto, and the Seaman only made it so that Ino's poison was useless in his system and he had enough strength to begin defending. It was still cause for great concern. What the hell is going on? At this rate, the hold on Lee would break, and the fact that his skin turned red once he opened the last gate didn't give him any solace either. It wasn't fast enough for Lee's tastes though, as he continued to struggle, and the moment he realized that brute force could break Shikamaru's shadow, he decided to go for broke himself and open all of the gates he was able to. Shaman, Gate of Pain, open. He has more? Shikamaru asked, visibly sweating to keep a hold of Lee. If his hold on the Kagemon no Jutsu failed, then he didn't want to know what would happen to him. Come on, there has to be a way to work this out. He had to think of a way to win. There had to be something. Asuma was on the edge of his seat, just watching with rapt attention and horror as Lee seemed to keep getting stronger and stronger. There was no way Shikamaru could deal with that, no matter how smart he was. It was brute force in its purest form, too much for Shikamaru to overcome with only the use of his mind. Guy, how many gates did you teach him to open? Kakashi asked accusingly. This is insanity, giving that much power to a genin. You know how dangerous the gates are. For everyone, the user and especially the target. Shikamaru could be beaten to death if he was hit the wrong way by Lee. It just didn't seem fair by any stretch of the imagination, even used by a kid that had no talent for ninjutsu or genjutsu. You wouldn't understand. So I don't care about your judgment. Lee needed this. Guy said, confident in his decision to do so, until Asuma grabbed him by the front of his flak jacket and pulled him close to look into his dangerous eyes. Lee got lucky with Ino, but if Shikamaru gets killed just because you wanted to give your student a nifty little world-beating kinjutsu, I'll make you pay for it myself. Asuma said with barely restrained rage in his voice. I can overlook once, with 1 gate. This kid knows how to open 4 gates. 5. What? Asuma said, more or less demanding Guy to repeat himself. What did you just say? Lee can open 5 of the 8 gates. Guy said, not bothered by Asuma's grip on his clothing. He still has 1 left to open. There isn't any sense of fair play here, Asuma. This battle is serious. From her seat, Tsunade could only shake her head. A genin being taught to open the 8 gates, that's sheer irresponsibility. It's over. There was no feasible way Shizune could argue the point against her. It was clear how much power was radiating off of Lee, more than enough to finish Shikamaru, but opening that many gates tears your muscles after its use. This is so troublesome. Shikamaru grunted out, struggling to keep his focus. He had a plan, not much of one, but it was the best shot of him not getting turned into human paste by Lee's fists. I hate my job. He was wasting his chakra just trying to keep this monster from breaking free. Taman, Gate of Limit. Lee shouted at the top of his lungs, open. The chakra rolling off of Lee's body was clearly visible, and then he did something terrifying. He crossed his arms in front of his chest as if Shikamaru's shadow wasn't even binding him. This is it. He then disappeared from Shikamaru's sight as if he had teleported. I surrender. Lee reappeared directly in front of Shikamaru with his fist cocked back, his body showing the full benefits of the 5 opened gates complete with the totally white eyes. He didn't let the punch go however. What? I give up. Shikamaru said, stepping back away from Lee with his hands up in a placating gesture. I'm not going to get kicked to sleep permanently when I know I'm beaten. You win. He then turned his back and started walking away casually. I'm done. Lee stood stunned as his body still blazed with the effects of the 8 gates. Winner of match 2 by way of verbal surrender, Rock Lee of Konoha. It figures that a team with a failure on it would have a coward on it as well. Neji quipped in regards to Shikamaru's sudden surrender, and no one there had any room to argue to the contrary. This left Naruto all alone with the series currently being 3-on-1. Said blonde didn't even bother to respond to Neji's shot at him as he was down the stairs and out the tunnel the moment he heard Shikamaru say that he surrendered. He sprinted over to the site of the last battle, and ran directly into Shikamaru. What the hell am I going to do to beat that? Naruto said in a low yell. Nothing. Shikamaru said plainly, just listen to me and do this. He said before pulling Naruto close to whisper in his ear. By the time he finished, Naruto's eyes were wide and he nodded dumbly. Now stick to the game plan, no bravado or hero tactics here. With a firm pat on the shoulder he walked past Naruto back up to the observation area. Naruto himself, instead of charging out to begin the battle the way he was about to, simply began walking his way up to Lee, who was still teeming with power. By the time he got to face off with Lee he had a calmly lucid look on his whisker-marked visage. Are you ready? Sekka asked as it was his turn to referee the next match. Yes. Lee said firmly, ready to uncork the ass-beating of a lifetime on Naruto once the fight was started. Naruto looked between Sekka and Lee. This better work, Shikamaru. Tenten and Neji don't look like they're coming down, but why would they when Lee is like this? Naruto stayed silent before turning to Sekka and cocking his head curiously in a fake ignorant ruse. Huh? I'm sorry, did you say something? Sekka raised an eyebrow. I'm asking if you're ready. No. Naruto said, crossing his arms resolutely. I'm not ready. It hasn't been 2 minutes, so I don't have to fight yet. The cigarette that had been placed in Asuma's mouth as a way of relieving his stress at the current scene dropped unceremoniously once he heard what Naruto said. He turned to Guy and saw a look of pure horror on the man's face, and a grin sprang to Asuma's own. It wasn't over yet. Yes. Asuma shouted at the top of his lungs, yes. I don't know which one of those 2 little bastards thought of that one, but yes. Okami, yes. He turned to Guy and stuck up his middle finger in his face. That's what I think of your 8 gates, Guy. And that's what Shikamaru and Naruto think too. He started walking around his aisle with his hands up in the air in victory as if a giant had just been slain with a slingshot. Kami, I love my team. But. Guy looked absolutely mortified as he realized what had happened. That's not fair. That's completely unyouthful. Still in the middle of his impromptu victory dance, Asuma still had enough time to stop in front of Guy and taunt again. Well, there isn't any sense of fair play here, Guy. This is a battle. He said, mimicking Guy's earlier words. That's what you get for bringing an explosive tag to a fist fight. If the fists don't get close enough to fight and the tag goes off anyway, who does it really hurt? Nobody. Kakashi looked at Guy's ghost white face, loving the silence, and then back down at the battlefield, somewhat impressed. Teamwork even in a series of one-on-one fights. Good stuff. The masked Jonin said appreciatively. In the viewing area for the other fighters there was a sort of stunned silence over what Naruto had just said until Neji let out a sigh. Having seen the entire battle with his Byakugan, that will be it for Lee. All eyes turned to him as he unhappily spoke again. He will lose this battle. Even if we switched out to save him, he won't be any more use for the rest of the round if he even recovers enough to be a factor tomorrow. Are you kidding me? Sasuke said. His Sharingan was on just so that he could even attempt to keep up with Lee after seeing Lee's first move once the other gates were activated. Right now I can see the chakra flying off of him clearer than anyone else here, and Naruto can't beat that. If he can even take one punch from that and get back up, that would be amazing. True. Neji said, but whatever Lee did to fully power out of the Nara boy's shadow technique and the girl's poison is damaging his body, and it is only temporary, meant for a quick burst before leaving him. I can see his chakra clearer than you can. I can see it coursing through his entire body, in places where it shouldn't be as intense, careening from his actual chakra gates themselves. Tenten didn't really understand what Lee had done to gain so much strength. He could probably pummel a Jonin into powder as he currently was, but she could understand what Naruto was doing. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. He's stalling. Even the odd man out of the Konoha Genin, Kabuto, seemed interested in the turn of events. He can't do that. Can he do that? Stall. After staying silent long enough to think about it, Sakura seemed amazed by the revelation. Of course. At the beginning the proctors said that in the case of one-on-one matches there was a 2-minute period maximum between for people deciding if they wanted to switch out or not so that teams could deliberate. That was more so that people fighting back-to-back battles could rest, but they never said that fresh fighters couldn't use it either. Neji nodded seriously. He doesn't have to fight Lee or even try to outlast Lee while he is using these powers. He just has to waste as much of the clock as he can. It took 30 seconds for Uzumaki to get himself down to the field. It took 15 seconds for him to get the scope of this plan from Nara when they were talking, 20 more seconds for him to walk over to the proctor and Lee. He had 55 seconds of stall time by the time he was even asked to begin. Yep. Everyone turned around towards the back of the room to see Shikamaru sitting on the same bench as Ino, resting his hands behind his head comfortably while she sat next to him, still very injured, but smiling nonetheless. Since I was going to lose anyway, there's no reason to get put in traction before tomorrow trying to hold back a freight train when you can just let it run its course. I can do that, right? Naruto asked before pointing down at his foot to make up a fake excuse, because I think I've got a rock in my sandal and I want to get it out. I need a little bit more time to make sure I'm good to go. As long as I'm ready to go when 2 minutes are done, it's cool, right? Please say yes. You sneaky little. Sekka said, trying to fight off a smirk. You have 34 more seconds and the fight will start whether you're ready or not. Naruto nodded and a smirk was unable to be hidden from Naruto's face as he remembered Shikamaru's words to him before he walked out to meet Lee. Just listen to me and do this. Nothing. You don't do a single thing. Before every fight they ask if the competitors are ready, which means that they won't start the fight if you don't consent before the time limit for the rest period expires. Use that. Lee said that he opened one gate to attack Ino, but that power only lasted for one attack, and did you see how tired he was afterwards? He can't hold that form of his forever, and you're going to draw this out for as long as you can because once it dies off he'll be completely exhausted. Now stick to the game plan, no bravado or hero tactics here. We don't fight fair. Naruto thought to himself as a method of reasoning out his own actions as Sekka counted down the last 15 seconds prior to the fight starting. Everything in this exam is a weapon. The field, even the rest time, is a weapon. Lee's skin color turned back to normal with only a few seconds left, and as Shikamaru said, he was completely spent. It was evident in his eyes that Lee had nothing left to give. Beautiful. But he was going to feel like a bastard after this was over. 7, 6. Sekka voiced out loudly before beginning introductions with 6 seconds left of stall time. Match 3, Rock Lee of Konoha vs. Uzumaki Naruto of Konoha. Fight. Sorry Lee, but I'm not losing here for any reason. Naruto said as a form of apology for the plan to defeat him. He ran towards Lee, who seemed barely able to keep one eye open but was still standing up. Lee's arms were down as now that the effects of the gates had worn off, Ino's paralysis poison had come back in full effect. The first move from the blonde was a simple stepping thrust kick that even then Lee was able to catch with his lowered hands, but he found that Naruto's foot was stuck in his grasp due to Naruto's fighting style. Before he knew it, Naruto had jumped his other leg off of the ground and planted it firmly, shin and ankle first, across the side of Lee's head. The single kick left Lee loopy and on increasingly wobbly legs as Naruto backed off. Naruto grit his teeth as he ran forward one more time and jumped towards Lee, drilling him in the head with a high-speed single-leg jumping knee strike, cocky uppercut, flash mallet. For extra purpose he grabbed a hold of Lee's head and pulled it towards the knee in mid-flight for added impact. And that was what it took to finally put Rock Lee down. Sekka kneeled down by Lee and revealed that he was unconscious. His eyes were open but dull, and his body twitched as it tried to move, almost as if he wanted to keep fighting, but due to the paralysis poison he was unable to actually do so. As if a medic nin would actually let an unconscious man get up to keep fighting anyway. The winner of match 3, Uzumaki Naruto of Konoha. Naruto didn't react to the cheering this time, he simply crouched down and turned his eyes up towards the competitor's box. There wasn't anything to celebrate yet. It took 2 of his teammates to put Lee down, because he didn't do a thing himself. Tenten walked out from the tunnel next, a serious look on her face as Lee was being tended to by the medics. As she walked over, Tenten placed a hand on her hip while Naruto was still crouched. "You sure you still want to fight?" she asked him. "You're all alone now. Ino-chan didn't get taken down and Shikamaru didn't burn Lee out just so I can stop now that it's 2-on-1. Naruto replied, standing back up straight as he pulled his goggles around his forehead down over his eyes. "Besides, I told you I'd beat you, didn't I? Now I don't have to look for you later just to fight again." Tenten laughed softly at his statement. "Bring it on, Naruto-chan." Both Naruto and Tenten were ready to go as they were set in fighting stances before Jay even made it over to referee the fight. "You both ready?" He got a pair of nods from the 2 genin. Match 4, Tenten of Konoha vs. Uzumaki Naruto of Konoha. Begin. "Last longer than 5 minutes this time, why don't you?" Tenten shouted as she grabbed a kunai and threw it directly at Naruto immediately. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, Shadow Clone Jutsu. After making his hand seal to create them, 2 clones appeared with one pulling Naruto out of the way to take the kunai hit for him. The second clone returned fire with a kunai of its own that Tenten countered with another kunai toss of hers before using her other hand to deal out a shuriken that dispelled the clone. Playing up a theme from their last battle, Naruto made 15 more clones to attempt to surround Tenten for an organized attack attempt, but she hadn't gotten any slower from their last encounter. Even so, as she took the time to dispel his clones with weapons to keep them from getting around her, it gave the original a chance to move in and try his luck up close and personal. This was perceived as Naruto to be a bad idea once he was suddenly forced to get directly back in order to avoid a whip cracking in his face. Naruto jumped away and stared at Tenten, who was now holding an actual bullwhip in her hand. "A whip?" Naruto asked out loud incredulously. "Who carries a whip? Ever? For anything?" There was having a lot of weapons, and then there was venturing into the realm of the absurd. There were many jokes of a Jiraiya-esque nature he could have been formulating in his mind at the moment, but then there was the part of him that was terrified at the thought of getting hit with that thing. "I am not getting hit with a whip today." Tenten scoffed in return. "Do you really think I'm going to let you swarm me with 10 million clones again like the first time we fought? I'm using one hand for the whip, the other to throw stuff at you and keep your clones the hell away from me until I can whip you into submission." She finished with a crack of said whip for emphasis. There was something wrong with the way that last portion was worded, but for the life of them they weren't thinking about that at the moment. At once, Naruto made the hand seal for more Kage Bunshin and formed a platoon of 30 clones flanking him before he made the gesture to send them after Tenten. Said girl swung her whip at the legs of the attacking clones, but they dodged by jumping over it. Once they did so, however, Tenten started quickly backpedaling and using her free hand to pepper the clones with a ranged shuriken attack while they were in the air and falling back towards the ground. The ones that survived quickly learned that her swing with the whip before had been to lure them into the air intentionally, as she masterfully kept them back, retreating all the while as she dispelled the bold attack attempts of Naruto's clones. Even if he pulled his machete out, he would never get close enough to use it, so that was out for close quarters combat. She wasn't letting the clones surround her so he couldn't bombard her with distance weaponry, and she was forcing him to chase her because if he backed off to try and change the area of the battle, he would still be playing into her hands. The further away from her he got, the better off she'd be in the long run, as long as she could see him. He wasn't significantly faster than her enough to flank and overwhelm her that way either. "Are you telling me that even after all this time she's still got my number?" Naruto thought to himself as he stayed far back enough to keep out of range of the whip but close enough to continue chasing her until he thought of something. Tenten would periodically throw weapons at him, but with the shuriken and kunai sent his way he could see them and block with the wide flat of his machete. Come on, calm down and think. What would Shikamaru do? The last thing he wanted to do was panic and make a mistake that would turn things from bad to worse. Well, first of all, they were out in the open, running nearby the stream, so the first thing Shikamaru would have done would be to angle the fight over towards places where he could hide and take cover. Easy enough. So without a word, Naruto began running closer and closer to the stream side, still blocking Tenten's weapons before jumping the divide of the stream with the assistance of a suddenly created Kage Bunshin to shove him and make sure he made it. Tenten narrowed her eyes at the two Narutos running perpendicular along the stream and threw a barrage of weapons at the one she figured to be the clone, forcing it to trip up and clumsily fall into the stream/moat in its effort to avoid the weapons while the other continued to pursue her on the other side of the stream. The further away you get from me, the easier you're making this, you know. I've been throwing with my right hand. So what? Naruto said as he continued to give chase, subtly and steadily trying to gain more distance towards the forest off to the side. A grin came over Tenten's face at the asking of Naruto's question. I'm left-handed. With that, she tossed the whip in her left hand to her right and that left her dominant hand free to do as she pleased. Motherfucker! Naruto shouted as he could see the deadly metal projectiles flash into Tenten's left hand. No more time to mess around and try to guide her there. It was time for a tactical retreat as he turned on the afterburners and made tracks into the forest to avoid the aim of the sure-shot Kunoichi. He suffered a few cuts in his clothes before he managed to get out of her sight, but better those than him. Ah, don't run, Naruto-chan. Tenten said as she jumped the stream herself and went into the forest area intent on turning Naruto into a human pincushion. I won't hurt you that bad. I am not running away. That's what it looks like to me. Tenten commented, putting the whip away since its use had run its course. I won't miss again the next time I throw. I'll be locked onto you. She saw a motion to the side of her from the brush and threw a shuriken, hitting whatever it was as a puff of smoke came up from the place, a clone. So this is all one big ambush? A few more rustling leaves in the trees and in the bushes resulted in Tenten hitting them nearly effortlessly as she slowly stalked through. At this rate you're going to lose half of your surprise attack squad before they even surround me. A nagging feeling in the back of her mind told her to duck immediately, and it was a good thing that she did because two of Naruto's clones were behind her. With a swing of their wind chakra circulating machetes they cut through the nearby tree and felled it with one swing. Tenten filled them with metal in immediate retaliation, ridding herself of them as well. She really wished she'd never sold him that thing. And like a scene from a movie, Naruto's clones began advancing wantonly on her direct position, using the trees for periodic cover once they saw their clone brethren begin to fall. The gate had slammed shut on the trap. We've been through this already once before, Naruto. Tenten said in between her extermination of his clones that were getting closer all around. Did you think that just by being around trees that would change anything? She asked before stopping her technically perfect barrage of accuracy to place two scrolls upright on the ground, making a few hand seals after doing so. The venue might be different but song is still the same, Sao Shaoryu, Twin Rising Dragons. She had apparently improved on the jutsu since the last time. This time the smoke expelled outward in a gust of air that obscured the clones' initial vision and stopped their advance for a moment. At that point the scrolls released smoke and unfurled into the air in a spiral of dragons just like before, and also just like before, Tenten jumped between them as high as she could and began throwing unsealed weapons at her multitude of targets. Her aim was impeccable. Everything hit at least one Kage Bunshin. There were times when weapons took down more than one. When the clones started trying to take cover behind the trees she had an answer for that too. She started throwing kunai with explosive tags attached to make a nice little explosion that took out multiple clones at once. The trees knocked down by the explosive tags still hit clones as well. Even when she ran out of things to throw in her supply they kept on coming though. It didn't seem like he was leaving anything to chance with his Kage Bunshin assault this time, but she had something for that as well. When I said that it was still the same I might have lied a bit. She said, revealing that she had wires attached to her hands that were connected to the weapons. She then started to spin around as the scrolls fell to the ground. The momentum from her spinning forced the attached weapons to do the same and they cut through anything that thought she had spent her entire payload of weaponry. With one thing left to do, Tenten cut her own ties to her weapons, sending them flying in all directions one last time with a flourish before she landed on the ground in a crouch. The forest area had been utterly devastated. She had knocked down at least 5 trees with her explosive tags and had cut deeply into many other trees with her larger weapons. This time, unlike the last time she fought Naruto and was fooled by his henge, she took note to make sure that all of her weapons were impaled into something, either the ground or a tree. When he last fooled her he had been a few shuriken that had been laying flat on the ground. She should have seen that back then. This time there was nothing out of the ordinary. Nor was there any sign of Naruto or any Kagebunshin. I got them all. Tenten thought to herself, but Naruto isn't here. Did he run? Naruto didn't run away, he merely got far enough away to be able to observe things that happened so that he could react accordingly. He wasn't there though. Either he had the best camouflage known to man or he was no longer in the forest area. I didn't let a single one get away. I aimed at the back first when I started my jutsu in case any of them tried to leave. The crowd was even slightly confused at the lack of Naruto as they muttered amongst themselves about where the young man could possibly be. Most of them had a great vantage point of Tenten's attack in the forest and saw her decimate every single replica without fail. There was no Naruto. Where is he? I can't fucking find him. Tenten thought angrily to herself, picking up a random katana that she had used to chuck at and skewer several clones during her previous barrage. I just killed upwards of 100 Narutos and not even a single one of them was really even the real Naruto. How did I lose track of him? Let's backtrack. She exterminated the multitude of endless Naruto clones in the woods. She fought off the attempt to lure her into the ambush, forcing a premature springing of the trap. She jumped the stream and chased Naruto into the woods in the first place out of his fear of getting a kunai tossed up his butt once she started aiming with her dominant hand. He ran on the opposite side of the stream from her after getting help from a clone to make the jump go smoother, possibly in an attempt to get ahead of her and cut her off. An analysis of the situation forced her to stop thinking backwards once she replayed the events of the moat-side pursuit in her head. Naruto made a clone that helped him jump it with no effort so that they could pursue her. This made one Naruto right behind her and one on the side of her across the moat. She got rid of the clone chasing behind her that tried to dodge a projectile attack and fell into the stream trying to avoid her. That impact would have dispelled any clone with as fast as they had been running and as hard as he would have hit the surface of the water tripping up at that speed, so she looked past it, focusing on the threat of the real Naruto. Or what she thought was the real Naruto. She had been around the real Naruto quite a bit during his time before actively becoming a genin back when they had trained in the same area. He had shown that there were times when he was very clumsy when things weren't serious, that had to translate over to a battle at some time, and apparently then was that time. Because the Naruto that had fallen into the moat was the real Naruto. Son of a bitch, I can't believe it. Tenten muttered to herself, taking an angry slash at a tree that stripped some of the bark off of it. At that, she immediately made to backtrack to the moat to pick up his trail again. I hope the fall knocked him out. And once she landed on the surface of the water in the moat, she could see orange in the distance. Running towards it, she saw that it was Naruto's short-sleeved windbreaker. She threw a kunai at it only for it to be revealed as the actual article of clothing and continued down the stream. Further down the way she saw Naruto, sans windbreaker, floating face down in the water. The need to win was higher at the moment than concern for her friend as she drew a shuriken and threw it at him. Hey, if he was already unconscious and drowning, a shuriken in the back wouldn't be that much worse, would it? But when Tenten hit her mark, that Naruto face down in the water burst into a puff of smoke. Further down the line of the twisting stream she saw a flash of orange that vanished once she looked up at it. He's luring me. Tenten then set out to pursue Naruto and take him down before he figured to jump out. Much like Lee earlier, if he was stuck in the moat he would be a far easier target. As she reached the place where she saw Naruto last, she came upon another windbreaker floating on the surface of the water. Again, Tenten threw a weapon at it before she reached it, but then paused and covered her face when the piece of clothing detonated, a proximity explosive tag. If she hadn't been trying to hit anything out of place with a weapon, she would have run past the vest and the tag hidden underneath it been caught in that explosion. Oh, you sneaky bastard. Hey. Ino said in an offended voice once she saw the explosion. Sakura had helped her over to the railing so that she could watch the fights. He blew up his top. I made him buy that for himself on our first day as a team. Doesn't he have any consideration? Shikamaru rolled his eyes. You make it sound like he doesn't have 7 more just like it. That's not the point. Ino said with a pout. Tenten kept chasing him through the moat, getting close enough to see him just around the bends of the moat before it straightened out near the bridge. She tried taking aim and hitting him with something to at least slow him down, but the bends of the moat walls and Naruto's attempts at running serpentine were effective enough to keep her from hitting him at a distance. Luckily his use of zigzagging allowed her to get closer faster. Naruto simply kept running without turning back until he passed underneath the bridge. Tenten ran underneath it as well until Naruto abruptly stopped and turned around, holding his hand out. Stop. Surprised by the force of his yell and the fact that he was finally stopping to face her, Tenten did just that, holding a katana at the ready. Done running. Kind of. Naruto admitted as he slowly made 4 slightly clumsy hand seals, further putting Tenten on guard for whatever he had in store. I'm done running because you lose. Fubaku Hujin, sealed bomb square release. Underneath the bridge where Tenten was still standing, there were tons of explosive tags, slapped to the sides of the walls in the dark underneath the bridge to mark the starting point of his trap, and out in the open where Tenten was standing, just on the side walls instead. What is this? If you move then the tags will detonate. Naruto said with a grin on his face, or I can do it myself if I make a single hand seal, so. Tenten stared at Naruto with a hard look before sighing, fine. I quit. Now deactivate these things already. Not until I hear someone say it's over. Naruto said, looking up at the top of the moat wall at J. The Kumonin looked at Tenten, who nodded slightly before he projected his voice over the arena. By way of verbal surrender, the winner of match 4 is Uzumaki Naruto of Konoha. Now let me out already. Tenten said angrily, not liking the idea of being surrounded by so many explosive tags. There really were a lot of them. Why do you have so many of these things? She was now also regretting the fact that she was the one that gave him ink and sealing paper. Naruto made a reverse ram seal to deactivate the trap and shrugged, because it's the second easiest thing I know how to make. I learned how to do this jutsu in a book. He walked over and began stripping the tags off of the wall to reuse since he deactivated them and had 2 minutes to do so. Tenten frowned at being defeated but lost her ire as she watched Naruto and a few clones diligently take down his explosive tags. She got herself out of the moat and waited for Naruto to jump back up before addressing him. I want a rematch when this is over, she said suddenly. Naruto had been walking over to Genma, who was set to call the last fight, when he heard Tenten call out to him. He couldn't help the cheeky grin that came across his face as he turned back towards her, slightly lamenting the loss of his orange windbreaker top, as now he was left with his long-sleeved blue shirt meant for winter wear. Tell you what, come back in 5 months and challenge me again to see if you're any better, and you owe me something cool. What? Tenten said indignantly, 5 months? And what do you mean I owe you something cool? Are you freaking kid dash? She then stopped herself before she began to laugh. She started laughing harder and harder as she started walking away back towards the entrance tunnel to get off of the field. Stupid kid. He really beat me just like he said he would. Well, Tenten seemed to be taking the loss well enough. At least it didn't seem like she was necessarily mad at him for it. That was good. He didn't want to make a friend mad just because he had beaten her. But the smile quickly dropped from his own face as he realized there wasn't really anything to smile about. He still had 1 fight left in order to advance. The crowd began to cheer as it was the first series of matches that went this far. All others became rather one-sided after a time, while in this one the momentum seemed to be swinging from one side to the next. The next match would decide who advanced further. It was one Naruto that was more or less still fighting fit against Neji, who was supposed to be Konoha's best genin. Both of them locked eyes, Naruto on the ground level of the arena and Neji up above in the competitor's box before he turned around and walked out of Naruto's sight to come down to fight. This was just what Naruto wanted the entire time, him versus Neji. Hey, you're not a genius. Who cares? Read this and you won't suck at Fuinjutsu, by Jiraiya. The mental portion of your combat readiness. The psychological part of our lifestyle is pretty important too. It doesn't matter how good you are, if your mind is in the wrong place you will be beaten by a genin even if you're a jonin. One thing about it is overthinking your fights. If you overthink something long enough you are almost guaranteed to suck at it big time. Think about every single written test you've ever taken. I know I do. That should be a good example of performance anxiety, when you are fully capable of doing something but the nerves just screw you over. If you were given a test on the spot about something you couldn't possibly know any more about, you would kill it, but if you were given a week to prepare for the exact same test and you were told that if you failed it you could never be a ninja, you would completely blow it, or at least not do as well. The same thing works for fights. You do better in a random ambush than you would do if you were marching towards a pitched battle that you know is important. To prevent overthinking anything like the consequences of said pitched battle that you spent 2 days traveling to, simply refrain from thinking of the consequences of the battle. Throw your rationality right out the door. This is harder than it sounds because you'll be thinking of your life, the life of your comrades, what could come if you lose the battle, all sorts of things. It takes practice with smaller things before you stop caring about losing. I'm not saying to not be prepared, get your shit together for certain, make sure you're prepared, no you won't quit on yourself or your friends when the going gets tough, but as long as your bases are covered and there's nothing left to do but fight, you should just go ahead and go about your business. A fight is a fight, so don't make it any bigger in your mind. Remember, your life is small and meaningless. The world's going to keep on turning with or without you sleeping in the ground. Also learn to trash talk and have pre-fight intimidation practices in case you ever end up in a face-off, because the less sure you can make your opponent feel of their chances, the smoother things will more than likely go for you. Develop a 1,000-yard stare that could pierce iron, learn to verbally cut your opponent to tatters and shoot their spirit from the skies, get a war dance or a grandiose pose that signifies that you are awesome and that your enemy will not win that fight. Another thing to not do in order to keep your own sanity, avoid paying attention to your opponent's own pre-fight battlefield rituals, because some of that stuff gets abundantly weird. I'm talking twisting their own nipples weird or licking their lips with an abnormally long tongue weird. Don't be that guy, and for your sake don't pay attention to that guy, because the last thing you want to do to a guy like that is get close enough to fight him. Who knows what he'll do to you if you give him the chance. Chapter 27, Way to Fall. In the stands, Shizune sat holding Taunton in her arms so that the little pig could see what was going on as well. She seemed to have an excited expression on her face as Neji walked out to face Naruto in the last fight of the series. Wow, that was pretty cool. They came back from a 3-1 deficit by pretty much outsmarting two opponents back-to-back. Lee had accessed the 8 gates and was forced to blow the technique without ever dealing a scrap of damage, thus it was easy pickings for Naruto to finish him off in a move or two. Against Tenten she was outsmarted by Naruto's copious use of clones and field positioning. This has been an impressive series. Impressive nothing. Tsunade muttered, staring at one of the tickets in her possession. If that brat knocks off the Hyuga kid and eliminates that team from this tournament, I'm out 200,000 ryo. Shizune's face was absolutely mortified at hearing that, and Tsunade gave her a sheepish look. Hey, they seemed like a sure thing to advance. You said you bet 20,000 altogether. Shizune said loudly, Taunton also oinking angrily in her arms. What are we supposed to do if you lose? That was most of our money that we have on us, and there's no branch of our bank in this country. We'll never get enough supplies to make it out of the country now. Why did she have to be the one that was responsible? Sometimes it was like traveling with a kid that liked alcohol and had the greatest chest in the entire world bar none. It'll work out. Tsunade said, not fretting over the monetary situation. The brat just fought a full-scale battle. Did you see all of those clones he used? He's got to be exhausted after all of that. The Hyuga kid is fresh and he's supposed to be the best. He can beat a tired rookie. Normally, but if she thought that Naruto was actually tired after creating 100 clones, then she was horrifically mistaken. And there wasn't really anything normal about this rookie. In the viewing area for the competitors, Tenten walked her way up to the railing and leaned against it with a sigh. I can't believe he beat me. Half a year ago he couldn't even touch me. Her brown eyes then blinked in thought. I guess he technically didn't touch me this time either, but man. He said he'd get stronger and he did. I didn't think Naruto could fight smart like that. Sakura said after seeing him trap Tenten. The last time she had seen him fight by himself, he more or less tried to kick Sasuke to sleep until the self-imposed time limit on the match expired, and that was the limit of his strategizing. Goldie-kun isn't stupid. Ino said, leaning on the railing near her old friend, he just likes using his body more than he likes using his head. The wounded blonde girl smirked at Sakura despite her injuries, but he always keeps saying his mind is scary, and he's kind of right about that. Shikamaru might be smarter than us and can come up with a plan for anything, but Goldie-kun is clutch and he can pull a win out of his ass if he has to. Sakura took Ino's words to heart as something to remember, since if they won their fights, Team 10 and Team 7 would be facing off in the next round, but still, you're talking like one of Naruto's half-baked plans would work on Sasuke-kun. He's still a long way from being that good. She looked over at Sasuke and noticed that he was looking intently at the field, as if he were trying to discern some kind of riddle. Or maybe the upcoming fight was just too interesting for him to respond to. Who cares about that? Tenten said, possibly cutting off the two younger girls from bickering. This is the last fight and the only thing you should be worried about right now. The winner's team advances. But Naruto can't beat Neji even if he could beat me. There's no way. Shikamaru shook his head at Tenten's words. I wouldn't be so sure about that. Naruto hasn't used up his bag of tricks yet. Over with the kids from Suna. Even Gaara was paying full attention to the battle for his own reasons. Keep winning, Uzumaki. You'd better keep winning so that I can kill you legally or you'll regret it. Asuma had now settled down from his previous celebratory actions and had instead taken to taunting Guy. So how's that 2-match lead working for you, Guy? Oh wait, that's right, they dropped the ball. Now it's dead even again, like nothing ever happened at all. I want my 80,000 Ryo. 20,000 Ryo per sensei, since Guy, Kakashi, Asuma, and Kurenai had all bet on their teams to go further in the tournament. The winner of this series and Kakashi's team would be the only Konoha teams in the bet left to contend. It's not over yet, Asuma. Guy said with a pinging smile, you know full well how good Neji is. He won't fall easily even to one of your wily students. Yep. They're wily. Asuma admitted freely, Team 10 is number 1 at running away, hiding, playing possum, misdirection, and all of that off-handed stuff. But when it comes to a straight fight, there's one of them I'd never bet against, and he's out there right now. Sitting to the side of them both, Kakashi took that moment to give his opinion. You know, I'm actually really looking forward to this. I dare say I'm excited to be a part of it. He said in his usual dry tone of voice. So who's winning? The three men all turned to the side to see Kurenai descending the stairs with Shino helping Hinata on the way down. It's more or less dead even going into the last fight. Kakashi said as he didn't trust Guy or Asuma to give impartial commentary on the happenings thus far. It's actually been a really exciting series. And as you can see, Naruto and Neji are the last two standing. Hearing that Naruto was about to fight Neji gave Hinata pause as she gasped at the news. Yet when she looked at the field she saw Naruto and Neji walking towards the Zen Garden from their respective places on the field to begin the face-off. Naruto-kun's going to fight Neji-san. Konohagakure no Sato, Exhibition Stadium. Naruto Onizuma is going to fight Neji. Hanabi said as she looked at the screen. So far this series of matches had brought up spirited debate and conversation among the people in the stadium, mostly questioning over how Naruto ever hoped to fight toe-to-toe with someone like Neji. While her father was watching intently, prepared to see a more wider breadth of Neji's skills, Hanabi had a smirk on her face. Everyone thought that with Naruto's style of getting close he was at a marked disadvantage due to the Juken and the Byakugan. Well, she knew something they didn't, and she figured that she rather liked keeping the secret that she had. Tetsu no Kuni, Chunin Exams Arena. On the field, Genma stood between Naruto and Neji as they both stood across from each other. Neji's face didn't show any inflection of opinion on Naruto's reaching him in this tournament, but he spoke up anyway. Are you ready to face your fate as a failure once and for all? This should be the ultimate lesson for someone like you, someone that did so much to get so close, only to fall in the end. If I lose it won't be because it was my fate to. Naruto said, his goggles that he pulled down before his fight with Tenten still obscuring his blue eyes from Neji's view. It'll be because I wasn't strong enough today. But I am strong enough. Fate doesn't have anything to do with this fight. And I'm not a failure. I'll leave you with this. Neji said coolly, closing his eyes and crossing his arms, a bit of counsel to think on while you're sitting in the hospital after this is over. For as long as people have known of you it has been because you were a prankster, a loudmouth that everyone in the village had heard screaming to the skies about your foolish goal of becoming Hokage. What chance do you think you have of becoming Hokage? Every Hokage has been a splendid ninja from the moment they began, the second they picked up the art. Can you honestly tell me you can compare yourself to any of the past Hokage at this point in your career? Naruto's fists clenched in anger before unclenching. Does all of this have a point or what? If I wanted someone to talk down to me I'd let Sasuke team do it. At least his banter is better than yours. A smirk came across Neji's face as his eyes remained closed. My point is simple. People don't change. The way you are born is the way you will be for your entire life. A failure will always be just that, a failure. And the only escape from your fate is death. So all of this was just me going with fate. Naruto said, gesturing to the arena around him, getting this far in the exams, beating your teammates. Well, fate must just love me then. He said that ironically because fate most certainly did not love him, and he knew that from personal lifelong experience. Neji shook his head, your victories are all circumstantial. You defeated Lee, why? Because of your teammates. You defeated Tenten with pure luck. It was pure luck that you fell into that moat and avoided the fate of your clones to her jutsu. And it was all done so that you could be taught this lesson by me personally. No matter how hard you struggle, no matter what you do, you cannot escape your fate. Taking the last of Neji's words with a scoff, Naruto stood at the ready in his combat stance, you make your own fate. In return Neji slid into his own taijutsu stance with his eyes still closed, it seems as though you are one of the types that requires a point to be beaten into your head. Likewise. The crowd was buzzing and roaring in anticipation for the bout. Genmo looked between the two genin, and if those two didn't look ready to fight then he needed to re-evaluate the definition of the word ready. There wasn't even any need to ask them, he already knew the answer, match 5, the final match of the series. The winner's team advances to the next round, Hyuga Neji of Konoha vs. Uzumaki Naruto of Konoha. If anything the people got louder in anticipation once he introduced them. A part of him wanted to milk the tension for all it was worth, but that would have been tacky. Begin. My eyes can see everything about you, and they can see that you are destined to fall. Neji said before opening his eyes, Byakugan. The veins around Neji's eyes became visible, indicating the activation of this technique. With his enhanced eyes he clearly could see the grin that pulled from Naruto's mouth once he did so and the twinkle of his eyes underneath his goggles. Shakura Hankyuti to no Jutsu, Chakra Echolocation Jutsu. A bright flash of chakra emitted from Naruto's body in the form of a shockwave as far as Neji's eyes could see. A regular person could never see the technique, but Neji was able to, and he got more of it than he ever wanted to get a glimpse at as he recoiled in pain, holding his eyes and stepping backwards out of his stance. Up in the balcony, Sasuke, who had been watching with his Sharingan on, abruptly turned his Kekai Genkai off and turned away from the fight holding his eyes. Gah! What the hell was that? He shouted in pain. Sasuke! Sasuke-kun! Choji and Sakura ran over to Sasuke who had seemed to suffer some kind of damage to his eyes. What happened? Choji asked in concern. It feels like a flash bomb went off in front of my face. Sasuke said, rubbing his eyes to get some kind of relief. Konohagakure no Sato, Exhibition Stadium. Hanabi shook her head once she saw Neji recoil in pain at what the audience perceived to be nothing. Poor Neji. Naruto Onisuma's technique is the downfall of all jujutsu of insight. What do you mean by that, Hanabi? The little girl turned to her father who was looking at her with his usual stern, taciturn face that would have intimidated anyone else. To her he was just dad, so it wasn't particularly unnerving. Do you know what just happened? Hanabi nodded, yes father. Naruto Onizuma released a pulse of chakra that he uses to locate things around himself. But when you look at it with the Byakugan it looks like a flash of chakra moving in all directions before hitting us in the eyes. She shivered in her seat slightly at recalling her experience with it. It's terrible. It was strange to see his daughter acting like a normal little girl due to the way she was during training, but that shiver was not an adult Hyuga gesture, it was something a little girl would have done. But he understood what she was saying nonetheless. The Byakugan could see chakra. Naruto was releasing pure chakra as a method of sensing the environment around him. That chakra flew outwards sharply and swiftly, otherwise the technique would be useless for sensing if it were slow. And once the chakra hit someone's body it would also run up their front, as in their faces, and the chakra would also run across their eyes. As far as a Hyuga was concerned that was like running a searchlight directly at their face or worse. Worse because it seemed to hurt at close range, and worse because as long as the Byakugan was active there was no safety from that move even with their backs turned due to the 360 degrees of sight. Naruto let out a boisterous laugh as Neji stumbled back. Can you see me now? He asked with a devious looking grin on his face, then take a look at this. Naruto ran forward and placed his own head under one of Neji's arms before securing his own arms in place around Neji's torso, trapping him in place. He then popped his hips and lifted Neji in the air by this manner before bridging himself backwards and slamming Neji over onto the sandy ground, leading with his upper back, shoulders, and neck, Aurora no Jozen, Aurora Divide. Naruto then rolled through his bridge and backflipped over Neji, landing on his feet. At first Neji didn't move an inch from his position, laying on his shoulders and neck with the lower half of his body folded forward and the top half stuck in the sand, but eventually the rest of himself rolled through as well, depositing himself face first on the ground instead of on his back. Naruto figured he was out cold, or worse. The landing was terrible. He fell with all of Neji's and his own weight on the back of Neji's head, neck, and upper back. However, Neji's hands gripped the sand in the Zen garden tightly and he pushed himself back up to his knees and then his feet, showing Naruto that while he had his head in the sand he had deactivated his Byakugan. Interesting. Neji said as he slowly got up, I believe you would do the same thing every time I activated my Byakugan. What a trump card. Little Hanabi told me that my sensor jutsu hurts the Byakugan. Naruto said with a smirk on his face, and I figured, what better way to handicap you? If you can't use your Byakugan you can't use your Jukin. You're done. I see. Neji said, wiping the sand off of himself and working his neck to ensure that he wasn't injured. The sand had literally saved his neck, because Naruto had spiked him like a lawn dart. It is quite ironic that despite the fact that the branch house is slated to serve the main house, it is a main house Hyuga that has revealed a weakness to our Byakugan. Ironic in the most anger-inducing way possible. Naruto shrugged with a frown. Little firecracker didn't do anything. I used the jutsu around her, it hurt her eyes. It's that simple, it's not hard to put together. It wasn't fair to blame Hanabi for watching him perform his jutsu the way any Hyuga would have. Hey, maybe I was fated to learn this jutsu so that I could kick your ass. He joked, getting back into a ready position. Neji set himself back into a basic Gyukin stance. I didn't say I gave up. I simply said that the Byakugan was useless against you. One has absolutely nothing to do with the other. I am not that easy to overwhelm. Yeah. Naruto said with a chuckle, well, what are you going to do if you can't see inside of me to do anything? Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, Shadow Clone Jutsu. 4 Naruto clones popped into existence and rushed at Neji directly, looking to take advantage in a hurry. If you think that I need my eyes just to fight. Neji said as 2 Narutos came at him first, reaching out to grab him. He swatted the hand of the one on his right down and spun around, simultaneously grabbing that clone by the face and sweeping the leg of the other one, knocking it to the ground as his hand formed a claw hold on the clone's face and slammed it to the ground by the head, dispelling them both. You are woefully mistaken. Naruto had felt victorious until Neji managed to defend himself with a more brutal and direct-looking attack style than Naruto had seen him use with his Jukin. What? Neji stood back up regularly and remained in his fighting stance. Do you really believe that all we are taught is how to attack the Tenketsu and your chakra network? That we were poking around with your chakra from the very start of our training? Wrong. Neji said, narrowing his eyes. Before we ever gain access to our Byakugan we are taught to fight from the moment we are able to stand and walk. So until we can access our Byakugan we are drilled in a harder style based on the principle of teaching our younger practitioners the basis of the Jukin and conditioning them to some of the motions they will learn later. A blank stare came from Naruto, even visible even through his goggles as all 3 remaining Narutos tilted their heads to the side. Huh. They chorused in unison. Idiot. Neji mumbled before trying to dumb it down. Before we learn the actual Jukin, to get us used to fighting we learn a full contact style based on the Jukin. One that doesn't cause internal damage and is less precise since it is meant to hurt you externally. Oh. All of the Narutos said at the same time, understanding him now, but why didn't you just say that at first? I did. Neji snapped at him before regaining his stoic composure, however I don't need to use chakra to deal you damage, but then again adding it doesn't hurt. Because after all if I hit you in the heart or in an organ it doesn't matter if I can see it or not, does it? With that, Neji charged forward at Naruto and his 2 clones. Running interference for their creator, Naruto's clones charged ahead to meet him, both of them throwing punches that Neji caught in the palms of his hands, but when he tried to pull away he found that his hands were stuck fast to the fists of the clones, who both smirked as they had Neji held wide open for the original Naruto, who ran up to Neji and jumped up and kneed Neji in the face, then sticking himself to Neji's chest with his right knee and his shoulder with his left foot as a base. For himself to settle to aim his elbow at the top of the helpless Neji's head for a sharp downward strike. Kuro ni Utsura, fade to black. Just before Naruto could deliver the crushing elbow strike that would have smashed the top of his head like a coconut, Neji allowed himself to fall directly back while Naruto's clones were still sticking to his hands. He used his legs for a pair of rolling throws to toss the clones overhead. He went all the way through with his roll, winding up with him on top, and the attached Naruto on his back on the ground. Neji drew his hand back for a palm strike meant to deliver crushing damage to Naruto's face. However, he was still close to Naruto, and Naruto switched up his taijutsu game plan. He gained enough space between himself and Neji to shoot his legs up, wrapping them around Neji's neck and one of his arms under the shoulder, trapping him in a tight choke, Sankaku Jima, triangle choke. Neji began flailing away once he felt his breathing begin to strain and eventually stood back up with Naruto's body hanging off the top of his head, holding his top half bent over towards the ground. In a move of desperation, Neji moved his legs by Naruto's head and began to stomp on his face, eventually dislodging him and freeing him before he could lose consciousness. In retaliation for the stomps that busted his nose, after letting go of his choke on Neji, Naruto kept a hold of the end of Neji's very long hair while still on his back on the ground and proceeded to kick him in the head and face repeatedly and unmercifully. He fights like a thug, Neji thought to himself as Naruto's kicks scrambled his senses. He reached for a kunai and used it to cut the last few inches of his own hair under his tie that kept it from swinging too wildly in battle. He looked down at Naruto angrily and turned his kunai in his hand to stab downward at the grounded Naruto, only to find his blade clashing with Naruto's quickly drawn machete. The blood from the wounds that had freshly been formed on Neji's face by Naruto's barrage of savage kicks dripped down onto Naruto's face before the blonde with the currently bloody nose and busted lip kicked Neji in the side of the head one last time to break up their crossed blades, allowing him to jump back to his feet. Neji spit blood on the ground in a very undignified manner as he still held the kunai in his hand. "I see you fight appropriately to your station." He again saw a blank look on the bloody face of Naruto and sighed as he put the weapon away. "You fight like a hood. It's supposed to look ugly," Naruto said in defense as he sheathed his machete, "and it works. Now let's try this again." With that he made 3 more clones that went after Neji like before. When they got close enough to engage him, one clone ate a kick to the face that dispelled it, but the 2 others managed to get a hand on Neji, sticking to him again to hold him in place as one of the clones delivered a nasty close-range knee strike to Neji's body. The original Naruto took note of this and formed dozens of clones that rushed forward to take advantage, this time with a knockout beatdown of epic proportions in mind. Instead of panicking to free himself, Neji smirked at the advancing original. "I know the secret to your taijutsu," Neji said before somehow breaking the grip of the clones, and a wave of visible chakra emitted from his body just as Naruto started jumping towards him set to attack. Hakushou Kaiten, 8 trigrams palm rotating heaven. He began to rapidly spin, turning that visible chakra into complete shield of the energy that dispelled the clones and knocked Naruto away, sending him bouncing off of the top of a rock in the Zen Garden. Konohagaku no Sato, Exhibition Stadium. What? Hayashi thought to himself in shock as he saw Naruto get sent flying by Neji. That was a main branch technique. How did he learn how to perform it? He could see the satisfied look on Neji's face over the monitor, as if the boy just knew that he was being watched by Hayashi right then. Tetsu no Kuni, Chunin Exam Arena. Naruto appeared from the other side of the rock his body had unceremoniously bounced off of, still ready to fight as he shook the sand off of his body, blood streaming down his face from his forehead, nose, and mouth from accumulated damage. "What was that? How did you break my grip?" No one had ever done that before. He had been overpowered once he had actually grabbed hold of someone, but once he grabbed someone, that was that. He didn't let go until he wanted to do so. Until now. He was actually more concerned about that than Neji's defensive jutsu. "You think that I'm not aware of your application of the tree climbing exercise to your taijutsu?" Neji said before chuckling a bit. "It took a moment at first to realize how you were sticking to me with the back of your hand and the bottom of your knee. But then I realized that you're just using tenketsu that most shinobi ignore due to the lack of use they generally find from them. I can break your chakra's grip on me by disrupting it with my own chakra flow in that exact spot. Most shinobi wouldn't be able to do this, you're just unfortunate that you ran into me. Okay, so grabbing Neji and caving in his face with profuse violence was no longer an advantageous option. Machete time. I don't need to grab you to hurt you, and I've been kicking your ass from the very start. Naruto said as the metal of his machete rang against the sheath when he drew it. The only time you've ever hit me is just so you could keep me from putting you out. You can take a beating though. You'll never touch me again. Neji said resolutely, you can't get past my ultimate defense. Let me guess. Naruto said dryly, I'm fated to be stopped by it. Chucking his machete would be a no-go this time. That only worked the last time because his opponents had trapped themselves and made it as easy as hitting fish in a barrel. Neji had already seen it once and wouldn't be stupid enough to stand in its way and test his defense against it even if he believed it was that strong. He could avoid it as easily as child's play. He didn't peg Neji as the type to do something unnecessarily, so he wouldn't either. But then again, Asuma said that wind element chakra could cut through anything. Let's see if your ultimate defense can stop the ultimate battle element from cutting it to ribbons. Naruto said, holding his machete at the ready to charge Neji down. Neji merely smirked and set himself in his stance, prepared for the clash of abilities, if that is what you want. I'll be glad to embarrass you again before I end this battle, all without the use of my Byakugan. Even without the use of my Kekai Genkai, you're still just a failure, destined to fall to one greater than you. Instead of charging, Naruto let his machete fall from his grasp as he held onto it by its chain to keep it from falling into the sand, apparently having second thoughts on the charge. You know, for someone that thinks they can see everything, you sure are blind. What do you think of yourself? Tell me your opinion of Hyuga Neji. Neji blinked in surprise. No one he had ever talked down to ever asked him that question. I'm referred to as a genius. A prodigy. The strongest Hyuga of my generation, some say. I didn't ask you that. Naruto replied, pulling his goggles up back to his forehead to look Neji in the eyes seriously. I asked you what do you think of yourself, not what other people think of you. Once Naruto's question rolled through Neji's mind for a few seconds, he clenched his fists hard enough to draw blood from his unbandaged hand. I'm a slave, destined to toil for the rest of my life in a role thrust upon me due to an unfair caste, all for tradition. No matter what I do, no matter how talented I show myself to be, I will always be considered beneath talentless people who are incapable of being effective ninja. People like Hinata-sama. He finished, seething in anger. I'm like a bird that's been caged, never to find a use for the wings I've been granted. Never to fly. And you're okay with that? Naruto asked him, you're alright with thinking of yourself as a slave, as useless? Then you're the failure. Not Hinata, not me, it's you. Neji's eyes widened at Naruto. I might not be the smartest ninja ever like Sakura-chan or Shikamaru, and there are guys like Lee that are faster, and guys like you and Sasuke have amazing bloodline abilities that I can't touch, and Gaara and Fu have powerful techniques that make fights so easy. I know that. He admitted freely, I did fail. I got knocked down a lot, and believe it or not, I got knocked down right at the start of my life, kind of like you. Neji's eyes narrowed, and the only thing keeping him from activating his Byakugan out of anger was the fact that Naruto could let loose a blast of chakra that would make him blind again. He didn't think he could dodge an attack blind. He'd have to work on that later or something, in addition to trying to overcome his blind spot even when the Byakugan was active. What would you possibly know about having a mark on you that you can never rid yourself of? That follows you everywhere and will be with you until you reach the grave. Neji said in an accusing voice. You can believe me if you want to, it doesn't matter. Naruto said, not upset at all by Neji's refusal to believe his words. But even though I've failed before, even though Hinata might have failed before, we're not failures. Everyone screws up, but being a failure is letting everything that's happened get to you, to let it beat you in the end like you did. You've got to keep reaching. You're not born to be a success or a failure, you've got to make it that way yourself. No matter what, you're going to get knocked down somehow, you've just got to know how to fall, and get back up when you do. Konohagakure no Sato, Exhibition Stadium. Hanabi looked at the screen with Naruto's face on the screen with a huge smile on her face. One could even say that her clear eyes were sparkling at the way the whole thing looked on the screen. It was like Naruto was a superhero or something, mostly because on the massive screen that allowed everyone in the stands to see the action you barely registered the fact that Naruto was so short. Naruto on Asuma is so cool. Hanabi whispered in awe. She didn't even care if her father heard her that time. It needed to be said. Uzumaki Naruto was the coolest person she had ever met in her 7, going on 8, years of life. Of course that might have been because she didn't get to meet many people outside of her clan and he was the one she had the most pleasant prolonged contact with. On the other hand, Hayashi didn't care about that. His mind was stuck on the concept of failure and Naruto was right, everyone made mistakes. No one is ever perfect, but if one shows the desire and intent to improve their faults then anything could be overcome in time, maybe even the rift in our family can be as well. Tetsu no Kuni, Chunin exam arena. The crowd had been dead silent for Naruto and Neji's conversation, hence they heard it all. It brought a smile to Hinata's face when she heard Naruto more or less defend her from Neji's accusations of referring to her as a failure. Naruto-kun, you really are a strong person. Kurenai had to smile at that kind of determination and even Kakashi's single visible eye crinkled in approval. Asuma just lit a cigarette with a cool look on his face that said, that brat's on my team. And Guy was being youthful, such passion and heartfelt determination. Guy exclaimed with tears streaming down his face dramatically, a spirit that shines bright in the dimmest of backgrounds can only be held by one brimming with youth. Go Naruto! Show the hard work that has brought you this far, and let it burn brighter than the flames of genius. Kakashi had to then choose that moment to chime in, a Guy, not that there's anything wrong with rooting for Naruto, but this is the last fight. If Neji loses then your team loses, and that means you lose, and you're out 20,000 ryo. I deserve such a punishment for engaging in the unyouthful activity of gambling in the first place. Guy said, now shedding tears over his own regretful actions, and Neji will learn a far greater lesson should he lose. Yes, Naruto's victory is the best thing for everyone. Naruto. Take notice of my manly features as I, might Guy, cheer you on to victory. Kabuto looked down at the field sheepishly after hearing Naruto speak to Neji. He's one tough guy, isn't he? More like stubborn. Sasuke remarked with a smirk. Ino shook her head with a smile on her face. That's our Goldie-kun though. On the field. We'll see how strong that heart of yours is once you're in cardiac arrest. Neji said to Naruto, done with talking and prepared to fight again. You really are blind. Naruto said, swinging his machete around in a circle, not for the other reason I was talking about before, but because you didn't see this coming. Naruto said as he made a single half-ram seal with his other hand, maybe that just makes you deaf though. It was a wonder to Neji what he was talking about until he paid attention over the crowd noise and heard a sizzling sound underneath his feet. What? No. I won't. Neji immediately activated his rotation technique just as a massive blast rocked the area around him. The smoke from the explosions cleared and Neji stood standing in a smoking crater created by his jutsu and the explosion, breathing heavily at the near miss that he managed to block. That was it? I told you that nothing gets through my defense. Nothing that you can see. Naruto said, still swinging his machete in a casual circle, but who do you think planted those tags in the first place? He said with a massive grin before letting out a sharp whistle. Before Neji knew it, ninja wire had been bound tightly around his entire body, holding him in place, unable to initiate the rotation aspect of his defensive jutsu. I can't move. From the sand rose up 3 clones of Naruto, one behind him and one on either side of him, all holding the wires tight. What? The clones all had their goggles down and their bandit bandana-style headbands pulled up over their mouths and nose. In addition to being covered with sand, the sand was loose enough for them to crawl underneath towards me. But how could they see me down there? How did they know where I was? And when did you make them? I made them when you tossed me behind the rock with your spinny move. Naruto said, you can't see everything important without your eyes on, remember? You've got a bad habit of not looking around you past what you already see in your field of vision. That was a bad habit from Byakugan use that Naruto picked up on early. What you see normally isn't all that's going on around you. And they found you because that jutsu I used to blind your Byakugan isn't meant to do that, it's supposed to be a sensor jutsu. Sand is loose enough for me to feel things through unlike solid ground, so they knew where you were the whole time. I can't believe it. Neji thought, continuing to struggle in vain. 1. Naruto was strong enough on his own, 3. Holding him was impossible to free himself from, and instead of using chakra they managed to sneak the ninja wire around him under the sand so there was no way to break free without the necessary brute force. Believe it, Naruto said, making a holding out his machete in front of him by the chain at the end of it as he started to swing it in a circle faster and faster, channeling wind chakra through it as he made a half-ram seal and held the extended fingers up to his neck as if he were checking his pulse. You lose, Dateba yo. Suishinki Haratsu Bunkatsu Sen, propeller burst splitter. Naruto began swinging the machete on the chain, almost making it look like the blades of a fan before he held it up in front of his face and blew into it. A direct cyclone, the circumference of the swinging machete's length, came flying out from the front of where Naruto was blowing through. It blew all the way towards Neji and engulfed him completely before small cuts began to appear all over his face, clothes, and body from the jutsu. Neji began to scream in pain from the wounds being created on his person, not even able to step back or get his arms up to try and protect his body, before he finally fell to his knees and slumped to the ground unconscious. The clones dispelled as Naruto cancelled the jutsu and stopped swinging his machete, letting his arm and the chain go slack as the blade of the machete dropped limply into the surface of the sand. He let out a sigh as Genma walked over to Neji to check him over. As the proctor checked for Neji's well-being, Naruto placed a cigarette in his mouth and lit it. He was glad he was done fighting for the day, just as soon as Genma dash. The winner of Match 5, Uzumaki Naruto of Konoha. Therefore advancing to the semifinals of the tournament are the winners of Bracket 1, Narashikamaru, Yamanaka Ino, and Uzumaki Naruto. That was what he wanted to hear. And apparently the crowd did too, as they went wild at the conclusion of the battle. As the medics checked Neji over for any substantial damage, Naruto walked away and gave a few waves to the crowd with a grin on his face, keeping the cigarette trapped between his teeth. Eventually he got too excited to just walk back and started running and jumping around at his victory, all the way back to the tunnel. Konohagakure no Sato, Exhibition Stadium. Even Konoha's partial crowd had to cheer at the conclusion of the Team Guy/Team 10 series of battles. The fact that the resident Jinchuriki managed to pick up the win didn't seem to bother them much, if any at all. On the screen he didn't look like a container that was going to lose control and bring about cubified doom upon them all at the drop of a hat. He just looked like an excited kid that had just picked up the biggest success of his entire life. Who couldn't feel that and get excited about it? Up in the highest box with his sensei's 2 oldest teammates, Jiraiya had to let out a laugh. Way to go, kid. I told you if you really wanted something, you take it. Tetsu no Kuni, Chunin Exam Arena. At the moment, the Konoha contingent were mostly mortified due to the actions of one of their Jonin. This time shockingly it wasn't Guy, it was instead Asuma who was up and celebrating Team 10's victory the only way that was appropriate for that point in time with a come-from-behind win like that. By standing and repeatedly pelvic thrusting directly in Guy's direction triumphantly, while he was still seated. Can you feel it, Guy? Asuma asked while pelvic thrusting after every other word for emphasis. Can you feel it? Kurenai was covering the eyes of Shino and Hinata from Asuma's rather lewd physical gestures. That's the feeling of watching your team get smoked like the last pack in the carton. Kami, it's a good time to Sarutobi Asuma right now. While this was occurring, Kakashi took out a camera from one of his vest pockets and took a picture of the scene for posterity, feeding Team 7 at the restaurant last night due to Chuji's appetite. 1000 Ryo. Jiraiya-sama's rare collector's platinum edition of Ika Ika that I found yesterday during the festival. 10,000 Ryo. Seeing your colleague do pelvic thrusts directly into another grown man's face while his girlfriend, 2 young children, and 20,000 people are watching, not to mention the fact that the camera is on him right now. Priceless. That was enough to stop Asuma mid-thrust. Wait, I'm on camera. Who's his girlfriend? Kurenai asked, narrowing her eyes at Kakashi. Shikamaru was watching the jumbo screen feed, complete with Asuma brand pelvic thrusting and a graphic displaying his name and the names of his students. Shikamaru palmed his face and shook his head while most of the others in the competitors' box started laughing. Asuma, I swear to Kami. I thought you were cool. You're totally making us look bad after that win. Meanwhile over on the bench against the back wall Ino was sitting down to rest again, only because Naruto was back up there as well, and Ino was currently fretting over the bloody mess that was Naruto's face and scuffed mess that was his long-sleeved blue undershirt and orange pants. He told her that it was mostly cosmetic damage, but she wasn't necessarily listening. He was bleeding from his hairline where he had bounced off of the top of the rock after Neji's chitin and it had time to run down his face without him wiping it away, but the bloody nose and lip he had suffered from when Neji stomped on his face were really the worst looking due to it running down the front of his face and shirt staining him with his own red. At this point Ino wasn't even listening to him when he tried reminding her that he healed fast. Ino-chan, it's alright, it's just blood and it's mostly dry by now. Naruto disputed against his female teammate. He had taken a seat next to her to see if she was doing any better after getting thrashed by Lee, and once she had seen how squalid he looked once he had taken his seat, she immediately began to fuss even though she wasn't any better off at all. He guessed because she wasn't bloody. Some of it wasn't even his though, since Neji had the courtesy to bleed on him as well. All I need to do is go to the bathroom to wash it off. Maybe he should have done that before coming back. Or maybe during his celebration he could have jumped into the moat for a victory lap through the stream, but then he would have lost his cigarette. So that wasn't an option at the time. Ino wasn't having any of his excuse making as she held his face in her hands and checked him over. Goldie-kun, there's a difference between being just resilient and running a marathon. You just fought 3 straight matches, and you still think you're alright. Well, he was hungry, and he was starting to get a little sleepy, but he figured that was just the lack of adrenaline kicking his ass. Ugh, you're a total mess. Poor baby, doing all that for us so we wouldn't lose. He's fine. A rather terse female voice said, getting their immediate attention. They both looked to see Fu standing nearby, a decent distance away though, as she tapped her foot impatiently and drummed her fingertips off of the bicep of one of her crossed arms. Little wounds like that aren't enough to do any real lasting damage to someone like him. So you can get off of him now, you're just wasting your time. Who did that girl think she was? Even if she was strong the way she showed herself to be in round 1, she wasn't going to stand there and tell Ino how to act after the bullshit she had just gone through a few minutes prior in her last fight. Why does it matter to you if I touch my teammate? He belongs to me. Naruto's eye twitched as Ino pulled the side of his head into a hug against her chest. Yes, it was nice, it was very nice, but he really didn't like the part where she said he belonged to her. The blonde Yamanaka girl was smirking at Fu as she did this, rocking her body with Naruto's for added tauntability. Of course I can see why you might be upset. I mean, you don't have anyone this adorable to latch onto on your team, and now you have to go out there and get beaten up by the hottest guy in the tournament to boot. Naruto took note of Fu's reaction to Ino's remark, and he could feel the same rising ire he felt when he started walking closer to Fu in the stairwell. Ino-chan, that's enough, he said, confusing her over why it mattered. Why? She asked as Fu took that moment to walk away towards the doorway to wait on heading down to the field. Oh, is it because she's a Jinchuriki? No. Naruto said, his head still halfway against Ino's chest, because come on, who in their right mind would push her away if they didn't have to? Still, he answered her question, just being a Jinchuriki by itself doesn't make you dangerous. Gaara was a serious contradiction to that statement, but he was willing to stick by it. Before she reached the doorway, Fu spoke up one more time, I can latch onto him all I want when I'm squeezing the life out of him next round. Her 2 other teammates Hooky and Doroba followed her out. Doroba took that opportunity to snicker, but Fu, I thought I was the only one in your life. You would cast me aside for a younger man. Of course he got no response from her as she had already descended the stairs. Not that she would have even dignified that with a response anyway, so beautiful and so cruel. As the Taki team left, Ino blinked while still cradling Naruto's head to her chest, almost as if she forgot he was there. What was that all about? He wished he could tell her exactly what she wanted to hear, but he didn't know what it was about himself. There was something familiar about how Fu reacted though. He didn't know what it was, but it was going to eat at him for the rest of the day once the fights were over. Looks like it's our turn again, Sakura said, patting her cheeks for blood flow in an effort to try and get herself warmed up somewhat for the next fight. She pointed over at Ino confidently, sit tight Ino pig. After this is over you can start thinking about all of the ways I'm going to tear you apart tomorrow. She then paid attention to something very obvious. Why are you holding Naruto's head like that? Ino tilted her head confusedly and answered her question with a frown, because Goldie-kun's had a long day and earned snuggle time with his Ino-chan. She gestured her head down to Naruto's rather worn-out appearance. Look at him. He just looks like he needs a hug. She said as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. But what about Sasuke-kun? Sakura said, not noticing the glare directed at the back of her head from said boy for bringing the topic up in the first place. He's right here. Ino fired back immediately. Sasuke-kun's about to fight, and does it look like he needs a hug at all right now? Without missing a beat, Naruto responded in kind even though he wasn't even in the conversation. Sasuke team always looks like he needs a hug. He said with a smirk before Ino used one hand to pull on his whisker-marked cheek. Ow. Be good. Ino chided as if she had some kind of control over Naruto. Since she had his head directly in her grasp, she actually sort of did. But why could she argue with Sakura and he couldn't even crack a joke? That wasn't fair. All right, enough. Sasuke said in an exasperated voice as he walked towards the doorway. Come on Chuji, let's go win this thing. Said chubby boy hopped up from his seat on the ground near Shikamaru to head on out to the field. Sakura saw her two teammates heading out to go down the stairs and ran after them to catch up. It is good to see that you were victorious, Uzumaki. Naruto and Ino turned towards the sound of the voice, this time it being Gaara, leaning on the wall near his team. The unexpected comment from Gaara actually managed to inspire Naruto to free himself from Ino's warm and demonstrative embrace. Well, thanks Gaara. I guess. If you failed to win I would have killed you. Naruto raised an eyebrow while Ino paled at the directly blatant threat against his well-being. Naruto didn't react any further because he had a question that would have outweighed any trepidation he had at the moment. Wait, you said you were going to kill me anyway. I was. I am. Gaara admitted, but as long as you are in the competition I can do it without a chance of repercussions. If you had lost I would have been forced to kill you, and your entire team due to the inconvenience of going out of the way to then get to you. The feeling of Ino clutching tightly to his arm got Naruto's resolve to harden in the face of Gaara's callous threat. You'll have to go through me first. That was the original idea. Gaara said before moving towards the railing to watch the next match. Temari and Kankuro had never seen Gaara after someone like this before. It was almost like Gaara himself was finding a way to take pleasure out of waiting to kill Naruto instead of just doing it, like a cat playing with a wounded mouse or something. It was actually creepier than just watching him flat out kill things that made him angry. And something about it just felt wrong. More wrong than it usually did. You're not a completely worthless wind user like I thought at first, so I'll give you some advice. Temari said quietly so that Gaara didn't hear her. If you get that far enough to fight Gaara, just quit. Surrender and leave. Go home as fast as you can. You can't beat Gaara. Kankuro said, following up on her point, no one's ever even touched him before. Hope they've seen enough to promote you if you make it that far and just go. On the field. Taki team wins the coin toss. Sekka said, pointing towards them, pick your matchup. He said as the teams stood on the stone bridge spanning the stream. Team battle to get this over with quick. Doroba said confidently with a smirk. His strangely patterned eyes seemed to shine with poise. We haven't seen anything impressive from these kids, even if one is the last Uchiha. It wasn't anything that Sasuke hadn't heard before from opponents trying to taunt him. Team 7 had run into about 4 different teams inside of the caves under the mountain, and each of them pretty much said the exact same thing, right before Sasuke kicked their heads and Chuji stepped on their faces. As they all looked ready to begin the fight, Doroba looked towards Hooky again. If you go down again in this round you had better hope that you die in the process or I'll kill you myself, weakling. It's been said before, but we don't need you anymore. Maybe intimidation would get him to fight a bit harder this time, maybe inspire him to get back up after just one hit. Sekka shook his head at the brazen threat on his own team member before projecting his voice. Quarter-final match, one team battle only. Phew, Hooky and Doroba vs. Uchiha Sasuke, Harano Sakura, and Akimichi Chuji. Begin. Sasuke was quick on the draw with his Sharingan activated to start the battle with a quick set of hand seals and a bang, Katon, Housenkan no Jutsu, Fire Release, Phoenix Flower Jutsu. In a hurry, Sasuke fired a volley of small fireballs from his mouth in a wild trajectory. Fu immediately jumped backwards, far out of the range of any of Sasuke's fireballs as she jumped away from the bridge and away from the stream side towards the forest area where she leaned against the nearest tree in a manner reminiscent of the way she got out of the way last time. Hooky was shoved out of the way by an arm that stretched out and shoved him out of the way over the side of the bridge, sending him landing into the moat. Dorobu merely jumped backwards all the way to one of the corner pillars of the bridge, using the strange black threads in his body to grab a hold of it and help him get high up on it to avoid Sasuke's attack as his arm reconnected with the use of his black threads. Hooky surfaced from being shoved into the moat and stood up on the surface of the water, "Thanks Dorobu," he said, as he honestly didn't feel like getting peppered with fireballs. "Everybody gets one." Dorobu replied seriously before looking over at Sasuke, "Is that all you've got? I don't even need to try. Iwa Bunshin no Jutsu, rock clone jutsu." He then spit out 3 wads of rock that landed hard on the bridge and formed into clones of himself. A smirk came to Sasuke's face once he saw that. "If you haven't noticed, I know a guy that can make way more of these things than you, and his clones are better," he shouted as he ran towards the forming rock clones. "Chuji, let's go." Chuji had already been in his expanded body form, having used Sasuke's opening attack as the opening to do so, Nakuden Sensha, human bullet tank. Chuji immediately began rolling towards the rock clones and Sasuke. Sasuke jumped directly over Chuji and the rotund ninja bowled the rock clones over like pins as he continued on his way to attempt to fell the pillar Dorobu was hanging off of. "I can already tell the big flaw in your jutsu other than being pretty slow," Dorobu said as he jumped off of the pillar and landed on the railing on the other side of the bridge. "You suck at maneuvering that thing." "We knew that already," Sasuke said as he began to land from his jump directly on top of Chuji's spinning form. He was only able to stay on long enough to kick Chuji in the side, and this assisted him in turning the ball to aim it in a sharp turn at the Taki ninja. "We fixed that." Dorobu only had time to create more threads from his body to try and catch Chuji's boulder-like body, but all this did was serve as a Seiyushin once it plowed into him and knocked him away, taking out the stone railing of the bridge as well with the force of the roll. As the body of the Kinjutsu using ninja took the hit, black threads visible as they wafted in front of him, Hooky looked up in awe, as Dorobu flew by over his head. No way. He had never seen a situation where he had been outclassed like that. Of course then he had to deal with the fact that Chuji's boulder body was now directly above him. He ran on the surface of the water and dove just as Chuji crashed into it with a great splash. Fu had to admit that she felt a twinge of satisfaction at seeing Dorobu get hit by Chuji's boulder attack. It felt good and she would have readily admitted that any day, whether he was her teammate or not. That word didn't particularly mean anything to her. At that moment Fu saw and felt a swirl of leaves surround her body and she went into a slight haze for a second before snapping out of it, putting her on instant alert as she hopped off of the tree she was leaning against. Her eyes looked around for an attacker but she could find none no matter where she looked. After keeping her eyes peeled for a sign of any sort of movement and finding none she looked back towards the bridge but did not see Sasuke or Chuji, nor Hooky, or Dorobu. Before she could start thinking about any of it she could hear the roar of the crowd get louder. She looked at them to see they were all looking directly at her, raising her ire for some reason. Before she could speak she heard the same noise of people directly behind her, but closer. She turned around to find herself in the middle of a crowd of people thousands deep of all ages and sizes, everyone she had ever met or seen all encircling her and getting closer with looks in their eyes of malicious intent despite the smiles on their faces. In her head as clear as day she could hear those people asking her to come closer to them, some offering her a birthday gift, others just children offering her to join them to play, but as they got closer many of them began brandishing weapons, still smiling at her. She felt like a little girl again, and she hated that because she knew what would happen next. Thus she let out an ear-shattering scream of desperation. Real world. Hooky's body was sent flying up from the surface of the moat to land on the bridge motionless. Sasuke walked up to him and kneeled down, grabbing him by his soaked hair to pull his head up as a method to check his consciousness. He shook his head and Sekka called it, "Hooky is unable to continue. He is eliminated." As medics hustled out to take him off of the field, Chuji made his way back to the bridge. It was an easy spot to fight from for those two as they were direct combat specialists. "Good work," Sasuke said as Chuji looked just as soaked as Hooky did, though not nearly as beaten up. "Not even close. Where's Sakura? Did she help you?" Choji shook his head as he tried to swipe the water from his hair and headband. No, she didn't even need to. I beat that guy in like 20 seconds. He pointed over to the end of the bridge where Sakura was running towards them. There she is. Where were you? Sakura pointed behind herself towards the forest area. I put Fu under a genjutsu to keep her busy while we defeated the other two. I can't hurt her myself if Kiba couldn't, so I figured I'd wait for you two instead of attacking her myself. She said with a smile before watching the medics carry away Hookie. Wow. Really? Again. She said with a deadpan look on her face. Talk about a third wheel. Yep. Choji said, proud of his handiwork. Now let's go finish off dash dot. Choji's comment was cut off by a scream that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. All of Team 7 turned to the forest area to see the sight of two fully uprooted trees flying from the ground. Through that, Fu seemed to be running towards them rapidly. I thought you used a genjutsu. Sasuke said, debating the merits of fight or flight in this instance. Pride be damned, that girl was radiating a strange green chakra that his Sharingan could see as clear as day. Little did he know it was a visible glow for those paying attention with regular eyes as well. Sakura brought out a kunai for self-defense. I did. It was weak though, so she could have broken it. It was just Magen, Narakumi no Jutsu, Demonic Illusion, Hell Viewing Jutsu. It was the second genjutsu Kakashi-sensei taught me when I was learning them, the one he used on me during the bell test. She felt out for her hold on the jutsu. Wait, she didn't break it. Then how is she still running towards us? Choji asked skittishly. I told you it was a weak genjutsu. She isn't bound by anything. Sakura yelled in return before taking a chance and ending the genjutsu. She could swear she saw the awareness return to Fu's face before it twisted in pure rage and she ran at them harder than before. Sakura threw her kunai at Fu. Much to her chagrin, however, it merely bounced off of her as Fu started charging across the bridge faster than they knew they could run from. Sasuke could see how fast she was moving with his Sharingan, so he technically had more time to try to come up with an answer, and he only really had one idea at the moment. Choji, I think we need to do it. We've got to use that move. Choji looked at him in surprise. Are you sure? It was supposed to be their trump card in team combat, something that the two of them had created right after Choji had returned from training with his father over the last month as a combination method of easily dealing with Naruto's multitude of clones and Shikamaru's shadow techniques simultaneously. It was an unspoken agreement that they were saving it for Team 10. Yes, right now. Let's go. Whatever you say. Choji said as his body expanded and he began to roll towards Fu in an effort to fight pure direct force against pure direct force. Roll. Sakura looked on in horror. Fu could stop Kiba's jutsu with her bare hands. What made them think she couldn't stop Choji's clan jutsu as well? Turning to Sasuke, she saw him running after Choji and making hand seals. Sasuke-kun, what are you going to dash? Kanbai jutsu, Katon, Fumetsu no Ryosei, Collaboration jutsu, Fire Release, Immortal Meteor. Both Sasuke and Choji shouted this as Sasuke breathed his fireball directly at Choji's rolling frame, turning his human boulder form into a flaming mass careening right at Fu. Naruto's jaw dropped as he almost hung over the railing trying to get a look at what he was seeing. Holy crap. Sasuke just set Choji on fire. He blinked to himself about how wrong that sounded, and he was okay with it. He turned towards Ino and Shikamaru. We've got to come up with something like that. Shikamaru knew that Choji had things like this in him if he put his mind to it, but this was ridiculous. Good luck with that. Ah, so it did end up working after all? Kakashi said as he saw the jutsu from his two genin take shape. Good for them. They never told me if they managed to work it out properly or not. The casual way he was speaking made Kurenai question Kakashi's sanity. One of your students is on fire, and you don't seem to care. It wasn't the first time she had felt this way about the man's mental faculties though. However, this was absurd. What kind of self-sacrificial jutsu dash? I told them specifically to never try it unless they were sure they had it worked out correctly. Kakashi said in defense of himself, it's no worse than teaching a genin to open the 8 gates. He said with a pointed look at Guy. He did what? Kurenai asked with a dumbfounded look. Kakashi looked at her with a cocked eyebrow before a look of realization crossed what was visible of his face. Oh right, you weren't here for that. But yes, he did. And you can officially not refer to Asuma as irresponsible for the whole smoking thing anymore. Definitely not when other genin were slinging around body-destroying kinjutsu and setting each other on fire for desperation attacks. Lucky for all of them that there was no such thing as social services in this society, huh? Yes indeed. Moments ago, within Fu's genjutsu. Just like when she was a little girl, Fu no longer allowed the crowds, no longer allowed anyone to get close enough to harm her without making them pay for it. And she charged, mowing her way through the mass of people surrounding her just as easily as she did the first true time she activated her combat abilities. She could never feel safe. She learned that lesson a long time ago. Everyone wants to hurt her, test her limits, and she always had to stay sharp. Her guard could never be down for her own security purposes. Anyone that got close to her was a threat to her safety, and anyone that was a threat to her safety had to be neutralized. But then the genjutsu suddenly faded and the crowd left, the voices stopped. Fu looked ahead and felt pure anger as she saw Sakura and realized what had happened to her. She never stopped running. They could try to stop her but none of them could. If she so desired it, there wasn't anyone that could stop her. The large Akimichi boy began to roll towards her, maybe to slow her down. Fat chance of that happening. She'd kick him to the side like the ball he was and then she would move on to the other two. Then he caught on fire. Real world. Fu immediately stopped running on a dime when Chuji's flaming ball form filled her vision. She couldn't just turn and get enough speed quickly enough to get off of the bridge, and the ball and the flames were too large to dive to the side to avoid. It was moving too fast to dodge by jumping from the bridge either. This was going to hurt her and she knew it, and that only made her stronger. Lifting her hands, Fu stopped the gigantic rolling Chuji right in his tracks, forcing him to spin while in her hands as he rotated hard enough for the stone bridge beneath him to break slightly. Fu could feel the intense flames burning her hands and forearms and let out a scream at the pain running through her before her eyes let off a green, pupil-less glow and green chakra started radiating from her body. She shot a leg back and kicked the bottom of Chuji's ball in the bridge, propelling him directly into the air. Sasuke and Sakura watched in combined awe and horror, everyone did, as from the bottom and the top of the red cylinder on Fu's back a pair of chakra blasts emerged and expanded outward, humming as if they were 4 insect wings in flight. She flew up and met Chuji to where she kicked him in the air as he started to descend, still in ball form. Flitters of ash came off of Chuji's ball body. Fu on the other hand had very severe burns on her hands and forearms and her white arm warmers had burned away, but she formed a fist anyway, one intended solely for Chuji as a receipt for his bold attack against her, Keishi Gomufer, eraser blow. She punched Chuji as hard as she could and sent him flying all the way up to the high ceiling of the arena where he hit it hard enough for parts of it to fall along with Chuji himself. Chuji was no longer in his ball form, but he was still expanded as he fell back to the ground. His body landed in the Zen garden, sending up a mass of sand as Genma hustled over with a group of medics. Fu merely hovered in the air above the Zen garden overlooking the scene before she heard a very loud and distinctive noise coming back from the bridge area. Moments earlier, bridge area of the field. Sasuke and Sakura could only watch as Fu flew into the air right before their eyes to follow up with her attack on Chuji. Damn it! Sasuke growled, his Sharingan eyes spinning angrily in his sockets. She was too high in the air for them to reach even with any of his fire techniques. Chuji! Sakura cried out for their helpless teammate as she could see an angry Fu gearing up to punch him. With their attention swept by Fu's overwhelming presence, they never felt the creeping figure walking behind them. That hurt. Both Sasuke and Sakura turned around only to be swatted by 2 masses of black threads. Sasuke was sent rolling head over heels down the bridge while Sakura was smashed into the side of the bridge that still had a railing. You and Fat Boy really did quite the number on me, Uchiha. Dorobu said, even with the Jienga that still hurt. Sasuke sat up only to be hit with a dismembered fist that flew over and punched him before being retracted back to Dorobu. Sakura looked up at Dorobu and attempted to make a rushed set of hand seals, only more black threads to reach for her and grab her around both wrists in order to yank her up to her, holding her hands above her head as he delivered a hard punch to the stomach that had Sakura coughing up blood. Sakura! Sasuke yelled as he stood back up and ran towards Dorobu, you son of a bitch. He reached under the back of his shirt and pulled out a Fuma shuriken, but just as he was to throw it, the thick black threads moved Sakura directly into his path, guaranteeing that a hit would cut clear through Sakura first before it ever reached him. In his hesitation, another stretching punch nailed Sasuke in the face. Laughter started to come from Dorobu. There. You get the idea, Uchiha. If you try anything on me, you'll be killing her first if you even hit me at all. He turned Sakura towards him with the use of the threads. Don't worry, beautiful. I won't be testing out that organ harvesting idea on you or anything. I doubt you have any that are useful to me. You're more useful to me like this. Sakura's arms and legs were bound by the threads, so instead of lashing out with an attack, she spit in his face and got another hard punch to the stomach for her troubles. What do you want? Sasuke yelled at him, still holding onto the Fuma shuriken. It couldn't just be to win. Your eyes. Dorobu yelled, I missed out on my chance to obtain one pair of legendary eyes in my last match, but I simply can't let an opportunity like this slip away. I've never transplanted organs into my own body before, but I know it can be done, and with the Jiangu it's supposed to be easy. But you would probably surrender before you give them up to me, and I don't want that. And you'll let her die before you ever give your precious eyes up, so I'll just kill you and take them. He formed the bird seal and stomped on the ground. Doton, Doryusu, Earth Release, Earth Flow Spears. Near Sasuke, the ground spiked up in an attempt to impale him where he stood. As he moved, he could see the ground shifting to do the same, allowing him to preemptively avoid repeated attempts at stabbing him with ever-shifting spikes. I've had enough of you. Sasuke yelled as he revealed it to actually be two Fuma shuriken, unfurling them both as he continued to dodge. In response, Dorobu placed Sakura directly in front of him to be a human shield. Both of them looked at each other, and the look in her eyes told him to attack anyway. So that's what Sasuke did. With a yell of exertion, he threw the large weapons directly at Dorobu and by proxy Sakura as well. Sakura just stared straight ahead with not a hint of fear on her face as the blades flew through the air, right past both her and Dorobu. The Taki ninja couldn't believe it. After the effort and the internal battle it took to decide to launch the attack in the first place, not only did one do so, they both missed. He had to laugh. What were you aiming at? Not you. Sasuke said, gritting his teeth with a smirk, revealing that he had ninja wire between his teeth and in his hands. The wires were attached to the shuriken that whipped around the pillars at the end of the bridge and came flying back towards Dorobu's rear, Sufushizen no Tachi, manipulating windmill triple blades. The weapons cut through the threads holding Sakura's ankles and wrists, freeing her and allowing her a chance to escape. Dorobu immediately gave chase to overtake her as she ran directly towards Sasuke. You bitch. You're not getting away. I'm a genius. I'm the keeper of the Jinchuriki key. I'm the greatest prospect Taki's had since Kaka's dash. Nobody cares. Sasuke said, quickly making three hand seals the moment he cut Sakura free. Lightning began to gather around his left hand in a loud noise that resembled the chirping of birds, about how talented you are in prospect. I'm talented in prospect. His Sharingan glared angrily at Dorobu with hatred for trying to take a hostage against him, a hostage that was his comrade. What matters is actually going out and proving how good you are, again and again and again. That's the only thing that being called a genius means, that you have to keep proving it. Guy turned towards Kakashi with a disapproving gaze while the other Jonin were staring in awe at what Sasuke had formed in his hands, knowing full well what it was. I can't believe you taught Sasuke that technique, Kakashi. A pure assassination technique. This time Kakashi didn't choose to ignore Guy's statement. I don't really care about your judgment, Guy, because Sasuke needed this. He said, mirroring Guy's own comment on his teaching of opening the 8 gates to Lee. Hinata's Byakugan could see the massive amount of power rippling off of Sasuke's left hand. His chakra is so intense. It had to be, since it could physically be seen even without her Jujutsu. Kurenai had never seen Kakashi's own personal jutsu, but she had heard about it and the telltale noise that it made when formed. But still, Kakashi. What made you teach Sasuke your first signature ninjutsu? Because he's like me? Kakashi said, once again making Guy reflect on why he taught the things he did to Lee. I've taught him to use this jutsu keeping in mind its one single purpose. To protect those precious to him. The way I wish I could have back then. He ran forward, dragging his lightning-covered hand through the concrete of the bridge, tearing it up as he sprinted forward. He could clearly see Sakura running towards him with Doroba right behind her, and his eyes were set firmly on him. Being a genius means that you have to live up to those expectations. And for the sake of the people that believe in you, you can never let them down. Sakura turned her head to Sasuke the moment they passed by each other, and for a second she felt like she had Sharingan as she felt time stop. Quicker than a bolt of lightning, no way for anyone to actually have seen it. She could have sworn that he turned a slight glance of the only eye of his she could see towards her, as if to make sure she was okay before moving along. Never again. She thought she heard him whisper to himself. And just like that, the moment was over and they passed each other, one moving far faster than the other with a target in mind. Doroba saw the lighting around Sasuke's hand and moved his black threads directly at Sasuke in an effort to stop him, but all that got him was a mass of cut threads and a slight shock from a contact charge that slightly paralyzed him enough for Sasuke to finish. No! He yelled. He hadn't even begun to scratch the surface of his kinjutsu. I was going to be greater than Kakuzu. Chidori, 1000 birds. Sasuke slammed the Chidori right into Doroba's chest, punching it right through the left side of his heart out the back of his chest. His hand still chirping with the lightning chakra in his hand, Sasuke moved his mouth closer to the still standing, yet officially dying, Doroba's ear. His whisper was only heard by himself and the dying man. His hand was stuck through due to the sound of the Chidori still going. You made a mistake when you tried to kill my teammate. I'll never let anything like that happen again if there's anything I can do about it. With a squelch he pulled his hand from Doroba's chest and let him drop to the ground, no more motion in the black threads that had been fully on display outside of the genin's body. He turned back towards Sakura, shaking the life fluids from the deceased Doroba from his hand until he heard the sound of insect wings beating. He turned around to see Fu right in front of his face, her glowing green pupil-less eyes staring at him, and he saw her fist coming directly at him in special Sharingan slow motion. Sakura looked in shock as Fu landed from her momentary position over the Zen garden where Chuji had fallen to and punched Sasuke right in the face before he could ever react. Fu was absurdly angry at Sasuke for adding the fire to the portion of the attack that had so badly injured her hands. If he hadn't, then she would have been able to stop Chuji's attack with barely a problem. Gritting her teeth angrily, she flew towards Sasuke, who was tumbling hard backwards. Sakura tried to get between her and Sasuke, but Fu merely barrel-rolled out of the weak girl's way, blowing her off of the bridge with the mere intensity of the chakra wings emitting from her red cylinder. With the distraction easily dealt with, Fu turned her attention back to Sasuke. Sasuke managed to roll through, loopy and bleeding from Fu's punch, but he was able to form another Chidori in preparation for her. It wasn't fast enough to attack her with as Fu body tackled Sasuke, squeezing him tightly as she started to fly up into the air with Sasuke in her grasp. Sasuke struggled, but it was like being caught in the grasp of a stone statue. In Fu's bear hug he could feel his bones creaking as his arms were by his side out of the reach of the other. I can't even reach my hands to make hand seals. No kawarami for him. After flying high enough in the air, Fu just held him there in a hover as he continued to try and fight to no avail. She just stared at him as he continued to fight against her as best he could. Let go of me. Sasuke managed to wheeze out as Fu's grip was murder on his standard breathing. He may not have been able to get himself out with a kawarami, but he still had the Chidori in his hand and used it to shock Fu's thigh, eliciting a cry of pain from her as her muscles tightened. Once she squeezed tighter, it finally broke his focus and he let the Chidori go. In response to his demand and attack, she glared at him and her lips quirked slightly towards a sneer. Whatever you say, she said before turning them directly upside down, allowing them to hover in the air for a few long, arduous seconds for cruelty before she turned her wings off. Both she and Sasuke began to fall to the earth with the naturally eternal weapon known to man as gravity, Keishi Gomu Ooshi, Eraser Press. Sakura had been knocked into the water and thus could only watch Fu carry Sasuke over 100 feet into the air before flipping upside down and allowing them both to fall to the ground. Sakura scrambled to get out of moat and over to the forested area where Fu was dropping. Fu let Sasuke go and let him fall through the top of the canopy of the forest and merely stared as his body pulverized every last branch in his way on the fall to earth. She wasn't sure if all of the snapping noises were branches or Sasuke's bones, but with as thick as some of those branches probably were, it was probably both. Sakura ran towards the forest area of the field as fast as she could and heard the crashing noise of Sasuke falling through the trees. Sasuke-kun. she shouted, running through the brush and the foliage before finally reaching the area covered with destroyed branches, tree parts, and a broken-looking Sasuke. Sasuke-kun no. She immediately dropped to her knees once reaching him, but didn't dare move him or touch him. Someone help. He was still alive, but he was a complete mess. He was still conscious because his breathing was pained and his eyes were clearly showing that he was in agony. The sound of something moving through the leaves gave way to Fu descending towards the ground before turning her wings off, her glowing green eyes staring at Sasuke and Sakura. She began to walk closer towards them as Sakura reached for a weapon but found it futile to do so. Fu had a limp due to the fact that Sasuke shocking her forced the muscles in her leg to lock and the nerves to go haywire. Still she had a look of anger in her face. Stop! Sakura yelled, tears beginning to fill her eyes as she thought about all that had happened. You've won. We give up, okay? It's over. We surrender. That still didn't stop Fu from continuing to walk forward. I can't beat you, but I'll fight you to stop you if I have to. Sakura stood up with a kunai, ready to defend herself. I said we give up. There's no reason to fight anymore. After all of this, are you going to kill Sasuke-kun the way you killed Chuji? They were both defenseless. Chuji was already beaten. Fu stopped walking and simply stood in place. You say you give up. Sakura held her ground with her weapon just in case but nodded. At that the green, thin aura around Fu's body faded and her eyes went back to having features and to their original orange color. Fine. With that she turned around and began to leave the forest area as the proctors entered with medics, most of whom had been working on Chuji when Fu had been fighting the others. They had only stopped on the bridge to check Doroba for his vital signs only to find none. She quit. He can't fight. I win. Sakura nodded with a sniffle as she dropped back to her knees near Sasuke as the medics began checking him over. Seka hurriedly projected his voice to announce the end of the fight, the winners of the match and advancing to the semifinals as the winners of Bracket 2, Fu, Hookie, and Dorobu. Seka went over to Sakura who couldn't believe what had just happened to them all. He placed a hand on her shoulder, getting her to look up at him. Your other teammate in the garden, he isn't dead. The expanded form he had when he landed and the sand protected him when he hit the ground. He's pretty bad off, but he should be fine. Sakura nodded, sparing a brave smile as the doctors loaded Sasuke up, preparing to move him somewhere to give him good treatment. Fu limped her way out of the forest and could hear the whispers of the crowd again now that they had seen her Jinchuriki form. It was expected, but she didn't care about any of them. She could have killed Sasuke. If she had released him any lower, making it so that he didn't hit the thick canopy leaves before falling through the branches to the ground, he probably would have died. She also could have held him up over the barren area or the bridge itself. That would have done the trick. She didn't kill the Akimichi boy either out of the anger of what had happened to her. Once he survived her punch, she didn't feel vengeful enough to kill him. They hadn't waved her off or announced him as eliminated, so she could have delivered another one to finish him if she wanted to. So why didn't she? When the genjutsu on her was first cancelled and she realized that Team 7 had made her live her nightmare turned reality, she was angry enough to kill them. It even got worse when she was burned. While she didn't go out of her way to keep them alive, she didn't kill them when she could have. You're not a monster. I am a monster. Fu thought to herself, if that's what you're treated like, and that's what people see you as, then that's what you are, like it or not. Will you stop saying you're a monster? Kid. Fu thought as she limped towards the entrance tunnel, I'm only saying what everyone else around me has said. I'm stuck with the Nanabi. It's the thing that's defined me for the last 10 years, ever since I was 6, and they stuck me with it when I entered the academy. If you've got one in you too, then why would you tell me not to think of myself as a monster? Because if that stupid thing inside of you makes you a monster, that means I'm one too. Growling to herself, Fu was wondering why that little punk was stuck in her head. Maybe because he was the only person that ever went out of their way to talk to her. He did it only because he wanted to, at least that's what he would have said. But there was something else he said that wasn't even directed at her. That something just stuck with her. Something he said while he had been fighting Neji. And you're okay with that? No. No, I'm not okay with that. I was never okay with it. Fu's footsteps echoed through the entrance tunnel as she decided to go to the medical bay. She could bandage and treat her own burns, because those doctors weren't going to touch her. She wouldn't allow it, I just dash. It doesn't matter. I am what I am, Uzumaki Naruto, and next round I'm going to show you just what that is. Hey, you're not a genius. Who cares? Read this and you won't suck at Fuinjutsu, by Jiraiya. Chakra Seals, the vindictive bitch of Fuinjutsu. The reason good, useful chakra seals are really high level is because it's really fucking hard to properly seal away an enemy's chakra. The arrays are complicated and have to be perfect, no mistakes. A single mistake will mean that you aren't sealing a single damn thing, all you did was make a pretty pattern that looks like dyslexic kanji. Even worse, if you screw it up you could be messing with your own chakra, and that's worst case scenario. Even then, a lot of seals can be broken. An opponent with an intense enough chakra can overpower your seal with pure will and chakra strength. That's a terrible situation. Hope that you never fight someone with chakra that's strong. It usually happens like that when your opponent has chakra that is as strong as your own or stronger, so be careful with that. Now back to designing your seals. The reason it is so precise is because chakra itself is the most important thing in your body. Without chakra you are dead, which is why sealing off chakra for good is impossible, because a body needs chakra to circulate. To do that would kill. It's like a law against nature that you can't do that. People have tried. For as long as Fuinjutsu has existed people have tried, and there is indeed a way to do so, but guess what the price is? Your immortal soul. So yeah, be careful with that. That's it for part 12. Thank you for watching and see you on the next video.